The boy found it in the mud, beneath a bridge where nobody was supposed to survive the winter. A motorcycle tag. Cracked leather. One name scratched into the metal like someone had used a knife in a prayer. Marcus Calloway. His uncle's name. A man everyone said was dead. 15 years old, no home, no one coming for him. Evan Calloway walked into the Iron Wolves compound holding that tag like a grenade he didn't know how to put down. And the man inside, the one they called Ryder Kane, he saw that tag. And something in his face broke open like old concrete finally giving way. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button. Drop a comment. Tell me what city you're watching from tonight. The rain had been falling for 6 hours straight by the time Evan Calloway crawled under the bridge. Not the kind of rain that washed things clean. The kind that came down sideways, that got inside your collar and stayed there, that turned the ground beneath an overpass into something between mud and rot. The kind that made the whole world smell like rust and wet cardboard, and whatever hopelessness smells like when it's been left out long enough. He was 15. He looked younger. He moved like someone who had learned to make himself small in rooms full of large, angry people, which was most rooms he'd been in for the past 3 years. The encampment under the Millbrook overpass wasn't a place Evan had planned to be. He hadn't planned most of the places he'd ended up. Planning required believing tomorrow existed, and lately that had started feeling like a theoretical exercise, like something you did in math class that had no application to actual life. He'd come because Darren Briggs, the 16-year-old who sometimes let Evan sleep on the floor of his cousin's apartment, had told him there were things left under the bridge. Good things, maybe. People who camped here sometimes disappeared fast and left things behind. A sleeping bag, a portable stove, sometimes a backpack with clothes still folded inside, which always made Evan feel something he couldn't name. The folded clothes part. Like whoever left them had believed, right up until they didn't, that neatness still mattered. The encampment was empty tonight. Whoever had been here was gone. What remained was scattered across a 15-foot radius. A crushed grocery cart. A blue tarp that had given up on being waterproof. A cardboard city that the rain had collapsed into dark brown mulch. Evan moved through it with his flashlight. The small one, the one he kept in his jacket pocket because he'd learned the hard way that phones could be taken, but a $5 flashlight was beneath most people's interest. He wasn't proud of this. The searching through other people's abandoned things. His third-grade teacher had told him he had a natural gift for mathematics, and that she expected great things. His third-grade teacher had also never met his father, never watched a family court judge sign paperwork with the bored efficiency of someone processing dry cleaning, never experienced the particular silence of a child services waiting room at 7 in the morning. He pushed a collapsed box aside with his boot. Underneath was a wooden crate, the kind that might have held fruit once, now gray and swollen with moisture. It shouldn't have interested him. It looked like nothing, but something about the way it was positioned, pushed back against the concrete support pillar, partially hidden beneath the collapsed tarp, like someone had put it there on purpose, made him stop. He pried the lid up. It resisted. He put his weight into it. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag that had done a decent job of keeping the worst of the moisture out, were objects that clearly meant something to someone. A stack of folded papers, yellowed. Some photographs, warped at the edges but still intact. A leather-bound notebook, small, the kind mechanics used for repair logs. And underneath all of it, sitting at the bottom of the crate like it had been placed there last and most deliberately, a leather key holder, cracked and dark with age, with a small metal tag attached to it by a steel ring. Evan picked it up. The leather was cold and stiff in his hand. He turned the tag toward his flashlight. The engraving was worn but legible. Someone had gone over it more than once, pressing the letters deep. Marcus Calloway. IW. -07. Evan stood very still in the rain beneath the bridge and read it twice. Then he read it a third time because the first 2 times hadn't processed correctly, and he needed the third to confirm that this was real and not some strange echo of every conversation he'd spent the last 3 years trying not to think about. Marcus Calloway, his father's brother, the uncle he had never met, the one nobody talked about at family gatherings, back when there had been family gatherings, back when there had been a family. He knew the name the way you know the name of a country you've never visited. From references, from context, from the shape of the silence that fell whenever his father had been drinking, and something unspoken moved through the room like weather. "Your Uncle Marcus," his father had said once, only once, on a night when the bourbon had gotten ahead of his defenses. "Your Uncle Marcus was the better one of us, and I let them take him." Then his father had gone quiet in the way that meant the conversation was finished, and Evan had never pushed, because you learned not to push his father when that particular quiet took hold. That was 8 years ago. His father was in Hatchet Valley Correctional now, 3 years into a 7-year sentence, and Marcus Calloway was, as far as anyone seemed to know, gone. Dead, maybe. Just gone. Otherwise. Evan put the tag in his jacket pocket and took everything else from the crate. He didn't examine it that night. He was too cold and too wet, and he needed to move before his fingers stopped working entirely. He walked 40 minutes to the 24-hour laundromat on Okafor Street, not because he had laundry, but because it had heat, and the woman who worked the overnight shift, a heavy-set woman named Dolores who smelled like lavender hand cream, had stopped asking him to leave 6 months ago, and now just set a paper cup of coffee on the folding table near the back without making eye contact, which was, in Evan's experience, one of the kindest things anyone had done for him in recent memory. He sat at the folding table and dried out and went through what he'd found. The photographs first. 6 of them. A man on a motorcycle, big bike, custom built, the kind you didn't see at dealerships. The man was maybe 30 in the photos, dark-haired, with a jaw like someone had carved it from something, and arms that belonged to someone who'd spent years doing physical work. He was smiling in 2 of the pictures. Not posing smiling, actually smiling, like the photo had caught him mid-laugh. In 3 others he was working, leaning over an engine, hands buried in machinery, face concentrated. In the 6th photograph he was standing next to another man who was younger, maybe 22, with the same jaw, thinner, something harder in the eyes. Evan turned the photograph over. Someone had written on the back in ballpoint pen that had faded to near invisibility, but was still legible if you held it at the right angle. "Me and Ryder. Millbrook Garage. March. No year." He went through the papers next. Most of them were repair notes, engine specifications, parts lists, handwritten diagrams of mechanical components. The handwriting was precise and small, the kind of writing that belonged to someone who'd trained themselves out of whatever penmanship they'd started with and developed something more functional. There were dates on some of the papers. The most recent one Evan could find was dated 11 years ago. The notebook was the last thing. He opened it to the first page, the same precise handwriting. But this wasn't repair notes. This was something else. If you're reading this and I'm not there to explain, then something went wrong. Start with the photographs. The man in all of them is me. My name is Marcus Calloway. I am not who they said I was. Evan read it once. Read it again. He looked up at Dolores, who was folding someone's shirts with efficient, practiced movements and paying him no attention whatsoever. He looked back at the notebook. The tag goes to Ryder. He'll know what it means. Iron Wolves, Millbrook Road. Don't go to the police. Don't go to anyone official. Just find Ryder Kane and show him the tag and tell him his brother never stopped looking. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the laundromat until Dolores' shift ended at 6 in the morning, and a younger man came to replace her, and the younger man did not have Dolores' capacity for strategic inattention, so Evan left before the question of his presence became a conversation. He walked to school. This was Wednesday, which meant first period was advanced mathematics with Mr. Pratt, who had told Evan in September, not cruelly, which almost made it worse, in the way that indifferent cruelty somehow stings differently than the deliberate kind, that he shouldn't set his expectations too high given his situation. His situation. Mr. Pratt had a way of saying the word that made it feel like a category, a filing system, a box Evan had been sorted into before he'd opened his mouth. He sat in the back row and kept his jacket on because the tag was in his pocket, and he was not ready to not be touching it. The lesson was something about geometric proofs. He understood it, which was the strange and persistent problem with school. He understood almost everything that was taught, understood it quickly and completely, and then had 6 hours left in the day with nowhere to put that understanding. His foster guardian, a man named Carl Siver, who took in teenagers the same way some people took in stray animals, not from cruelty, but from a vague goodwill that didn't extend to actual engagement, had told him twice that his grades were probably inflated. Schools do that, Carl had said, between innings of whatever game was on. Inflate grades for kids in the system. Makes the numbers look better. Evan had not answered. He'd learned that responding to Carl Seaver was rarely productive. After school, he went to the public library and used their computer to look up the Iron Wolves motorcycle Brotherhood and Millbrook Road. There wasn't much. A local newspaper article from 9 years ago that mentioned an Iron Wolves member assisting at a community accident scene. Local biker group aids injured motorist in the breathless, vaguely condescending tone local papers used when they were surprised that a segment of the population had done something decent. A brief mention in a business registry. Iron Wolves Garage, Independent Mechanical Services, Millbrook Road, Proprietor R. Kane. A few forum posts on a motorcycle enthusiast site that referenced the Iron Wolves with the particular mixture of respect and careful distance that told Evan these were people that other people knew not to mess with. One forum post, dated 4 years ago, said only, "Iron Wolves don't bother anyone who doesn't bother them. But if you come looking for trouble on Millbrook, you won't find what you're expecting." Evan logged off the computer. He sat for a moment with his hands flat on the table. The notebook said, "Don't go to the police. Don't go to anyone official." He thought about going to Carl Seaver. He dismissed this in approximately 2 seconds. He thought about calling his father at Hatchet Valley. He was allowed one 10-minute call per month. He'd already used September's. October's wouldn't be available for 11 more days. He pulled the tag out of his pocket and held it in his hand under the library table, his thumb moving over the engraved letters. Marcus Calloway, IW-07. The notebook said to find Ryder Kane, so he would find Ryder Kane. Millbrook Road was on the industrial edge of town, past the old textile district, in the part of the city that hadn't been touched by whatever urban renewal money had made downtown look like a lifestyle magazine spread. The buildings out here were functional: warehouses, auto shops, a trucking yard. The kind of block that existed to do work rather than to look like anything. The Iron Wolves garage was at the far end, set back from the road behind a chain-link fence with a push gate. A hand-painted sign above the main door. Black background, white letters, no logo, just Iron Wolves Garage. In the kind of font that didn't need decoration to communicate what it was. There were 3 motorcycles visible in the open bay, 2 of them in various states of disassembly. A single work light hung from the ceiling of the bay, casting a yellow circle that made the darkness at the edges look like it had weight. One man was working. He was crouched beside the nearest motorcycle with a wrench in his hand, doing something to the undercarriage. Late 40s, maybe. Wide-shouldered, the kind of wide that came from decades of physical work rather than gym time. His jacket was draped over a workbench nearby. Worn leather, Iron Wolves patch on the back. The emblem a stylized wolf head rendered in black and gray. He was in a gray thermal and jeans, both marked with grease in a dozen places. His hair was dark, going silver at the temples. His face, when he turned at the sound of Evan pushing open the gate, was a face that had been through something. Not disfigured, just marked. The way wood gets marked when it's been outside long enough. He didn't say anything immediately. He looked at Evan the way people who've learned to read strangers fast look at strangers. A quick scan, assessment, categorization. Teenager. Wet from weather. No threat. But something else there, something the man seemed to be trying to identify. "We're closed," he said. His voice was flat and even, the voice of someone who'd decided a long time ago that words were tools, and you used exactly as many as the job required. "I'm not here for a repair," Evan said. "I can see that." Evan walked closer. The man stood up slowly from his crouch, wrench still in hand, not threatening, but not putting it down either. He was taller than he'd looked crouching, considerably taller. "Are you Ryder Kane?" A pause, short but perceptible. "Who's asking?" "My name is Evan Calloway." Something crossed Ryder Kane's face at the name. Something fast and almost invisible, the kind of expression people made when they heard a sound they weren't sure they'd actually heard. He recovered quickly. But Evan had been watching people's faces in the moment before they decided what to show him since he was 8 years old, and he didn't miss it. Calloway, Ryder repeated. My father is Daniel Calloway, Evan said. He's in Hatchet Valley. His older brother was named Marcus. The wrench lowered, not dropped, lowered, deliberately, like Ryder Kane was giving himself a moment by giving his hands something slow to do. Was, Ryder said. That's what everyone told me, Evan said. He reached into his jacket pocket. I found this last night, under the Millbrook overpass. There was a box of things with it, a notebook, photographs. He held out the tag. Ryder Kane didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then he crossed the distance between them in 4 steps and took the tag from Evan's hand and held it up under the work light, and something happened to his face that Evan had no category for. Something that moved through it the way a shockwave moves through water, changing the surface completely before settling back into something that was close to stillness, but was not actually stillness, not anymore, because whatever stillness had existed before was now different in a way that was permanent. His thumb moved over the engraving, over and over, the way Evans had moved in the library. Where did you say you found this? Ryder said. It wasn't quite a question. Under the Millbrook overpass, the homeless encampment. It was in a wooden crate pushed back against the concrete support. Hidden, like someone put it there on purpose. Ryder's jaw tightened. When? Last night. Another long pause. Ryder was still looking at the tag, not at Evan. How old are you? 15. You came here alone? Yes. Ryder finally looked up from the tag. He looked at Evan with an expression that contained things Evan couldn't fully name. Not suspicion, not hostility, but something more complicated, something that moved in several directions at once. Come inside, he said. Out of the rain. Not. The interior of the garage was warmer than outside, but not by much. It smelled like motor oil and metal and old coffee, and something underneath those smells that Evan associated with places where serious work happened and serious people spent serious time. A smell like purpose, maybe, which was not something he'd encountered frequently in Carl Siver's house. Ryder led him past the motorcycles, past the workbenches covered in organized tools, past a half-rebuilt engine sitting on a wood pallet, to a back room that functioned as an office, and a kitchen, and appeared to double as wherever Ryder Kane spent time. That was not the garage bay. A battered couch against one wall, a table with chairs, a coffee maker on a small counter, currently active, a corkboard on the wall covered in paperwork and photographs and what appeared to be maps of local roads with routes marked in red marker. 2 other men were in the room. They both looked up when Evan entered. The first was younger than Ryder, maybe mid-30s with close-cropped hair, and the kind of stillness that wasn't peace but readiness. He was drinking coffee, and he didn't put the mug down. The second was older, heavier, with a gray beard and the eyes of someone who'd spent decades deciding whether to trust people and had a very specific ratio of outcomes. Neither of them said anything. Ryder put the tag on the table in the center of the room where all of them could see it. The 2 men looked at it. The younger one's jaw moved like he'd bitten down on something. The older one looked up at Evan. Where'd you get that? The older man said. He found it, Ryder said. Let me get the details before anyone says anything they don't mean. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Evan and sat down across from him. The other 2 men stayed where they were, present but not intervening, the way guards stay at the edge of a room when the conversation in the center is still being evaluated. Tell me everything, Ryder said, from the beginning. What you found, exactly where, exactly how, and then tell me what was in the notebook. Evan wrapped both hands around the coffee cup because his hands were still cold and because it gave him something to hold on to. He told it straight, without embellishment, starting from the beginning. Why he was under the bridge, what he'd been looking for, what he'd found, in what order. He described the crate, described how it was positioned, described each photograph, described the repair notes, described the notebook. When he got to the passage in the notebook, find Ryder Kane and show him the tag and tell him his brother never stopped looking, he recited it from memory. He'd read it enough times in the laundromat to have it exact. The room was quiet for a long moment after he finished. Then the younger man put his coffee mug down on the counter very slowly and said, to nobody in particular, 20 years. Ryder was looking at the table, not at the tag. At the table like he was reading something written on the surface that only he could see. He never stopped looking, Ryder said, quietly, mostly to himself. That's what it said, Evan confirmed. Ryder looked up then, looked at Evan directly. That complicated expression again, moving in several directions at once. You said your father is Daniel Calloway. Yes. And nobody sent you here. Nobody told you to find me. The notebook did. But no living person. No. Ryder was quiet again. The coffee maker finished its cycle and clicked off, and the sound of rain on the garage roof filled the silence. Why'd you come? Ryder asked. You could have thrown the tag away. Could have sold the notebook for scrap. Why come here? It was the question Evan had been asking himself since 6 in the morning, walking to school in wet boots with a dead man's tag in his pocket. He could have given several answers. Some of them would have been true. He could have talked about his father's one drunk confession, about the name that was never mentioned at family gatherings, about the photograph of a man actually laughing on a motorcycle in a way that suggested life had, at some point, contained things worth laughing about. Instead, he said the truest thing, which was the thing he'd been least prepared to say out loud. Everyone I've ever met has told me I'm going to end up like my father, because of my blood, because of who I come from. He didn't look away from Ryder. I wanted to find out if that was true. And I figured, a man who hid a notebook under a bridge and told whoever found it to come here. He gestured at the room around him, at the garage, at the tag on the table. That man thought someone would eventually come looking, thought it would matter to someone. He paused. I wanted to find out if it mattered to me. Ryder Kane looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at the tag. Then he picked up the tag and held it in his fist. Not tightly, just held it, the way you hold something you're not ready to put down. The photographs, he said. The man with me in the last one, with the writing on the back. Yeah. That's Marcus. Ryder's voice was level, professionally level, the kind of level that required maintenance. That photograph was taken 2 months before he disappeared, before everything happened. His hand closed around the tag. The tag was mine originally. I made it. I made 2 of them. One for me, one for him. When he rebuilt his first bike from scratch. It was a thing we did. Evan waited. I gave him IW-07 because he was the 7th person to join the Iron Wolves. First one I brought in myself. Something moved across Ryder's face. He disappeared 6 months after I gave him that tag. Cops said he ran. Said he was guilty, and he ran. I believed them. He stopped. For a long time, I believed them. The older man with the gray beard shifted against the wall. The younger man was looking at the corkboard like he was memorizing it. The notebook, Ryder said. You said it mentioned corruption. A business owner. I didn't read all of it, Evan said. I have it with me. I brought everything. He reached into his jacket and set the plastic bag on the table. The photographs, the papers, the notebook, all of it. Ryder looked at the bag. Didn't touch it yet. You said you came out here alone, Ryder said. Your guardian know where you are? No. Anyone know where you are? No. Ryder nodded slowly. Okay. He stood up. You're going to stay here tonight. Couch is yours. He looked at the younger man. Dex, call the others. Not a full meet. Just Harlan and Torres. Tell them to come in quiet. The younger man, Dex, pulled out his phone. Ryder looked at Evan again. The notebook, he said. I need to read it. Tonight. Evan pushed the bag toward him. Ryder sat back down and opened the plastic bag and took out the notebook and opened it to the first page and read the words that Evan had already memorized. If you're reading this and I'm not there to explain, then something went wrong. Start with the photographs. The man in all of them is me. My name is Marcus Calloway. I am not who they said I was. Ryder Kane sat with the notebook in his hands under the yellow work light of his back office while the rain came down on the roof, and he read. And Evan Calloway sat across from him in wet clothes with cold hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee, watching the face of a man who was discovering that 20 years of grief might have been built on a lie. Outside in the garage bay, the three half-dismantled motorcycles sat in the dark like sleeping animals. And somewhere in the building's bones, in the smell of oil and metal and old decisions, something that had been locked for 20 years was beginning, very slowly, with the resistance of something long rusted shut, to open. Ryder turned to page 3 of the notebook. His hand went still. Whatever was written there, Evan couldn't see it from across the table. It made Ryder Kane's face go through something that had no name in any language Evan knew. And when he finally looked up, his eyes were different. Not softer, not harder, just different. Carrying something new that hadn't been there 60 seconds ago. "Kid," Ryder said. Evan looked at him. "What's your full name?" "Evan Calloway." "No." Ryder's voice had changed, had dropped into something very quiet. "Your full name." Evan felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the rain. "Evan Marcus Calloway," he said slowly. "My father named me after—" "I know who he named you after." Ryder held up the notebook. His hand was not quite steady. "Because Marcus wrote it down. In here. With the date." He turned the book so Evan could see the page, could see the line written in that precise, controlled handwriting. "Daniel's son. Named for me. If this ever reaches you, Evan, I know you. I've been watching from the only distance that kept you safe. The rain was the only sound in the room." Evan stared at the words. His name, in a notebook hidden under a bridge, written by a man everyone said was dead. A man who apparently had known he existed, who had known what he was named, who had been watching from somewhere close enough to watch, but far enough to be invisible. "He knew about you," Ryder said quietly. "The whole time." Which meant Marcus Calloway wasn't just a disappeared man. He was someone who had chosen to disappear. And that was a very different story. The notebook stayed on the table between them like something that had detonated without making a sound. Ryder hadn't moved in 3 minutes. Evan had counted. Not deliberately. He'd just become aware at some point that he was counting the seconds between Ryder's last word and whatever came next, the way you count seconds between lightning and thunder to measure how far away the storm is and whether it's moving toward you or away. It was moving toward them. Evan was fairly certain of that. Dex came back into the room from wherever he'd gone to make his calls and stopped when he read the atmosphere. He looked at Ryder. He looked at the notebook. He looked at Evan with an expression that said he was recalibrating something. "Harlan's 20 minutes out," Dex said. "Torres said 30. Ryder nodded without looking up. Dex stayed in the doorway. "You want to tell me what's in the book? When the others get here?" Ryder, "When the others get here, Dex." Dex pressed his mouth shut and leaned against the doorframe and crossed his arms. He was younger than Ryder by maybe 15 years, but he carried himself like someone who had skipped several steps in the aging process, who had gone from young to experienced without a middle period. His eyes kept moving to the notebook and then to Evan and back. The older man with the gray beard, who had not introduced himself and whom Ryder had not introduced, had moved from the wall to the chair at the far end of the table. He was looking at Evan with the concentrated attention of someone conducting an assessment that had no form and no rubric, but would produce a definitive result. Evan looked back at him. "You're Daniel's kid," the older man said. Not a question. "Yes. I knew your father. Before." He didn't elaborate on what before meant. He didn't need to. "You look like him, around the eyes. People say that. How is he?" "Incarcerated," Evan said. 3 years in. 4 more to go." The man nodded. Something shifted in his expression. Not sympathy exactly, more like recognition. The acknowledgement of a specific kind of pain by someone who had a category for it. "What's he in for?" "Aggravated assault, the official version." Evan paused. He hit someone who needed hitting, according to him. The jury disagreed about the degree. The old man's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile. "That sounds like Daniel." Ryder finally looked up from the table. "Brick." His voice was quiet. "Not tonight." The old man, Brick, settled back in his chair without protest. The rain hadn't stopped. If anything, it had gotten more deliberate, the way rain sometimes did late at night, as if it had abandoned all pretense of being temporary and committed fully to being the permanent condition of the world. Evan drank the rest of his coffee. It had gone cold, but he drank it anyway because it gave his hand something to do, and because declining the hospitality of a room full of large, watchful bikers at 11 o'clock at night seemed like poor strategy. He thought about Carl Siver, who was probably asleep in front of the television and had not noticed or would not notice for several more hours that Evan wasn't in the house. This was not resentment. It was just arithmetic. Carl Siver took in foster children the way some people collected magazine subscriptions, with initial intention and subsequent inattention. He thought about the notebook and the line written in Marcus Calloway's precise handwriting. "I've been watching from the only distance that kept you safe." The question that sentence produced was not what he'd been watching. The question was what he'd been watching for. What danger existed, had existed apparently for years, that required Marcus Calloway to remain invisible to the people who should have been able to find him. Evan was still working through this when he heard motorcycles. Not Harlan and Torres, those were still minutes away. These were already outside, already stopping, already cutting their engines in the controlled way of people who knew exactly where they were and were making a deliberate choice about the sound they made arriving. Ryder heard it too. His head came up. His body language changed in a way that was subtle and total, the way a dog's body language changes when it hears something that requires a different kind of attention. "That's not Harlan," Dex said. "No," Ryder agreed. He stood up from the table. He closed the notebook and looked at Evan. "Back room, door on the left. Go in, close the door, stay there until I come get you." "What's now, Evan?" It was the first time Ryder had used his name. The weight it carried surprised him. He went. The back room was small and smelled like solvent and old rags. There was a metal shelving unit along one wall holding labeled containers of motor oil and cleaning supplies, a workbench under a small window that looked out on a narrow alley, and a folding chair. Evan sat in the folding chair and listened. He heard the front gate, heard boots on concrete, heard voices, not words, just the character of voices, the particular music of people arriving who were not concerned about whether their arrival was welcome. Then Ryder's voice, closer. "This is a closed shop." A new voice, male, with the self-assurance of someone who'd never had to earn the right to walk into rooms. "Just a conversation, Kane. Nobody's here for trouble." "You ride out to my place at 11 at night in the rain," Ryder said. "You're either here for trouble or you've got very poor social instincts." A pause. Then the new voice, less pleasant now. "We heard you had a visitor tonight. Young kid, asking questions." Evan went very still. "A lot of people ask questions," Ryder said. "I'm a mechanic. People ask questions about their bikes. This kid wasn't here about a bike. How would you know what he was here about?" Another pause, longer this time. "We've got eyes in this part of town, Kane. You know that." "What I know," Ryder said, and his voice had dropped into something that was completely flat and completely dangerous. The voice of someone who had removed all the temperature from a situation on purpose, "is that you've got about 30 seconds to tell me what you actually want before I stop being interested in whatever story you brought with you." Evan pressed his back against the wall of the small room. He could feel the cold coming off the exterior wall through his jacket. His heart was doing something unpleasant and efficient. Someone was watching the garage. Someone had seen him arrive, and whoever they were here within hours, which meant they'd been watching before he arrived, which meant whatever was in that notebook, whatever Marcus had been documenting, whatever evidence he'd assembled, someone had been waiting for it to surface. He'd led them here. He'd walked across town with a crate full of evidence and led them directly to Ryder Kane's door. The voices in the front of the garage went quiet for a moment. Then he heard boots retreating. The gate again, engines starting, not leaving angry, leaving measured, which was worse. Angry people acted out of emotion. Measured people acted out of plan. Ryder's footsteps came back toward the small room. The door opened. He looked at Evan with an expression that contained several complex things and said none of them. "Who were they?" Evan said. "Men who work for someone named Voss, Gerald Voss. He owns 3 commercial properties in the industrial district. Has his hands in several things that aren't properties." Ryder leaned in the doorframe. He's also the man who testified against Marcus 20 years ago. The cold in the room got colder. He knew about the crate, Evan said. Somebody did. Ryder looked at him. You said you were at the laundromat on Okafor Street, after you found it. Yeah. How long? Until 6 in the morning. Anyone talk to you there? Anyone see what you had? Evan thought about Dolores, about the paper cup of coffee, about the fact that he'd spread the contents of the crate across the folding table to examine them. The woman working the overnight shift, she wasn't paying attention. Someone else might have been. Evan absorbed this. The library. I used their computer, looked up the Iron Wolves. Ryder's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Search history. It's a public computer. Voss has people in several places in this city, not official people, just people. He said it without drama, as a statement of operational fact. You walked across town, used a public computer, and came here. Could have been picked up at any point. The weight of this settled on Evan's chest with the specific gravity of a mistake he couldn't unmake. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't. Ryder's voice wasn't accusatory. It was something more exhausting than accusation. It was the tone of someone managing the aftermath of an event they couldn't prevent. That's what I'm working with. He stepped back into the main room. Evan followed. Harlan arrived 12 minutes later. Torres arrived at 20. They came in through the back of the building, through a door that Evan hadn't known existed, which suggested Ryder had called ahead with updated instructions after the visit from Voss's men. Harlan was tall and lean with the kind of face that had been handsome once and now was something better. Interesting. A long scar ran from his left ear to his jaw, silver and old. He moved like someone who'd trained himself out of whatever natural grace he'd been born with and replaced it with deliberate economy. Torres was a woman, which Evan hadn't expected and which he recognized. In the part of his brain that monitored his own assumptions, he probably should have. She was mid-40s, dark-haired, wearing an Iron Wolves jacket with a road captain patch. She had the eyes of someone who cataloged everything and forgot nothing and chose very carefully what to act on. She looked at Evan when she walked in and said, "This is the kid." "This is the kid," Ryder confirmed. "Voss's people already came." "Yeah, that was fast." She looked at the notebook on the table. "That's it?" "Read the first page," Ryder said. Torres sat down, picked up the notebook, and read. Her face didn't move. She turned to page 2, page 3. She stopped at the page with Evan's name. She read it twice. Then she closed the notebook and looked at Ryder. 20 years, she said. That's what it looks like. Harlan, who had been standing against the wall with his arms at his sides in the posture of someone who carried everything in their body rather than their face, said quietly, "He's alive." "The notebook says he was alive when he wrote it," Ryder said carefully. "He's alive," Harlan said again, not pushing, just affirming something for himself. Brick from his chair. Voss knowing about the crate changes the timeline. If he's been watching the overpass, why would he watch the overpass? Dex cut in. For 20 years? Not the overpass specifically. Torres was already working it. The area, the whole industrial corridor. He owns property in that district. He's got eyes on it for other reasons. The crate showing up in his field of vision could have been coincidence. She looked at Evan. "You were there for how long? Under the bridge?" 20 minutes, maybe 30. "Did you move things around, disturb the site noticeably?" He thought about it. He'd moved the tarp. He'd opened the crate, taken things out of it. He'd left the crate open now that he thought about it, open and visible. "Yes," he said. Torres nodded. "Someone noticed the disturbance and reported it, this afternoon or evening. Voss's people checked it and found the crate empty and tracked back to find who'd been there." She looked at Ryder. "The laundromat's probably the pickup point. Somebody there is on his payroll or owed him a favor." "Or they got there faster than that," Harlan said. A silence with texture settled over the room. The kind of silence that came when a group of people who'd processed difficult information together before reached the same point in the processing simultaneously and were each individually deciding how to name what they'd arrived at. Evan felt it. He was not included in this silence the same way the others were. He was inside it, but not of it. But he felt its shape. He felt the way it pushed against the walls of the room and against his chest. "I put a target on your back," he said. Several people looked at him. "By coming here, by not—" He stopped. "I should have thought it through more. I should have been more careful about—" "You're 15, Dex said. Not unkindly. "And you're not wrong, but you couldn't have known." "Marcus knew," Ryder said. He was looking at the notebook. "He knew, which is why the notebook said to come directly here and not go to anyone else. He accounted for the risk. He just couldn't account for not knowing who would find it or when." "He hid it hoping for the best," Brick said from his chair. "Same as he always did." Something moved across Ryder's face at that, fast and painful. "Yeah," he said. "Same as he always did." Torres tapped the table. "We deal with what we have. Voss knows the crate was found. He doesn't know exactly what was in it. He knows something was because his people wouldn't have come here otherwise. But he can't know the specifics, which means we've got a window." She looked at Ryder. "How long do you need with the notebook?" "I've been through the first 3 pages." "How long?" Ryder picked up the notebook. "Get me 2 hours." "You've got one?" Torres said. "After that, we need a decision." Ryder looked at her. "What decision?" "Whether we're in this or we're not." She said it quietly, without drama. The way you state something that is not a question but is structured like one as a courtesy. 20 years is a long time to carry something, Ryder. Whatever Marcus wrote in there, whatever it opens up, we need to know if you want it opened. The room was very quiet. Ryder held the notebook in both hands. He looked at the cover of it, which was plain brown leather, worn, nothing on it. He turned it over once. The gesture of someone holding the last safe moment before a decision that eliminated all alternatives. "I've been sitting on this for 20 years, he said. "Thinking he ran. Thinking he chose to disappear. Thinking—" He stopped. He pressed his mouth shut. When he opened it again, the temperature of his voice had changed. Not warmer. More controlled. The control of something that had gotten too hot and was being deliberately cooled down before it could damage anything it wasn't meant to damage. He didn't run. He didn't choose anything except trying to protect what was left. He set the notebook on the table. "Yeah, we're in this." Torres nodded once. "Then let's work." They spread the contents of the crate across the main table. Harlan organized the photographs chronologically based on the dates written on the backs. Torres went through the repair notes and found, among the technical notation, pages that weren't repair notes at all. They were records. Dates, amounts, locations, initials. The kind of documentation that someone had embedded inside mechanical notation because they'd understood that anyone looking through a biker's repair notes would stop reading after the first page of engine specifications. Marcus Calloway had been careful. He'd been careful and thorough, and he'd been doing this documentation, this record-keeping, for longer than anyone in the room had realized. Evan stayed at the edge of the table and watched. He wasn't asked to participate, and he didn't insert himself. He understood intuitively that there was a protocol here, a way this group moved through shared information, and that inserting himself prematurely would cost him credibility he hadn't yet built. But he watched. He always watched. It was one of the things he was actually good at. He watched Ryder read. He watched the way Ryder's reading changed as he moved through the notebook, the slight forward lean at the beginning, the gradual settling back, the moment around page 9 or 10 where he went very still and stayed still for a long time. He watched Harlan and Torres work through the repair note documents with the systematic precision of people who had done fieldwork before, who knew how to extract information from disguised material. He watched Brick drink coffee in his chair and occasionally say something to the room that oriented the conversation when it started to drift. He was watching all of this when Dex sat down next to him, not close enough to crowd him, just adjacent. "You doing okay?" Dex said. "Yeah." First time sitting with a room full of bikers who've just discovered that everything they believed for 20 years might be wrong? Evan considered this. "Yes." "It's a lot." "It's a lot," Evan agreed. Dex was quiet for a moment. "Your uncle was, before he disappeared, he was the best mechanic any of us had ever seen. Ryder's the president, Torres runs operations, Harlan keeps the peace. But Marcus was the guy who could look at a broken engine and tell you what was wrong with it before he'd even touched it. He paused. The kind of skill you either have or you don't. Most people don't. Evan looked at the photographs spread across the table. The man mid-laugh on the motorcycle. Was he happy? Here, with the club. Dex thought about it like it was a question that deserved actual thought. He was getting there. He'd come from a hard place. Your grandfather wasn't a kind man, the way I understand it. Marcus and your dad both grew up in the kind of household that leaves marks that take years to work through. He glanced at Evan. Marcus was working through it. The club gave him something to be that wasn't just the thing he'd survived. He stopped as if he'd said more than he intended. Evan filed this away without comment. Across the room, Ryder turned to what appeared to be the final pages of the notebook. His reading slowed. Evan saw his lips move slightly. Once, then stop. He turned the last page. He sat with it for a full minute. Then he closed the notebook and looked up. Voss didn't just frame Marcus, he said. He paid 2 police officers to bury the investigation and falsify witness testimony. Marcus has the badge numbers. He has the dates. He has transaction records that he photographed from documents he accessed through a contact inside Voss's property management company. He looked around the table. His contact's name is in here. The contact disappeared 4 years after Marcus did. The room processed this. The contact's dead, Torres said. Not a question. The notebook doesn't say. But if the contact disappeared 4 years after Marcus did, Ryder left the math there unfinished because it finished itself. The officers, Harlan said, are they still on the force? One retired. One is currently a lieutenant in the 7th District. Ryder's voice was flat. His name is Gareth Pruitt. Brick exhaled slowly through his nose. Pruitt. Gerald Voss and Gareth Pruitt. You know them, Dex said. Pruitt pulled me over 3 times in 1 month 12 years ago, harassed 2 of our members. Went away eventually. Brick looked at Ryder. He went away because Voss stopped needing him to be a problem for us, because by then Marcus was already gone, and the thing they were covering up had been covered long enough that poking at us created more risk than it was worth. The room absorbed this new map of the past, events that had seemed separate revealing the roads between them. Evan said, The notebook said Marcus never stopped looking. Looking for what? Looking for a way to prove it? Looking for a way to prove it safely, Torres said. There's a difference. Proof that gets you killed doesn't help anyone. She looked at Ryder. He was building a case. Not for a day, not for a year. He was building something that would hold. For 20 years, Dex said, and the disbelief in his voice was not at Marcus but at the duration, at the specific endurance required to maintain a purpose across 20 years of isolation and silence. Ryder put his hand flat on the notebook. There's one more thing, he said. Everyone looked at him. The last entry, dated 8 months ago. He opened the notebook to the final page and read, The box is as complete as I can make it. If you're reading this, then I've either been found or I've run out of time. The evidence is real, and it's enough. I believe that. What it's not is safe. Taking this to any official channel in this city will get it buried and get whoever carries it hurt. The only way this works is if it goes sideways. Loud, public, undeniable. He looked up. Ryder will know what that means. Everyone looked at Ryder. Ryder looked at the table for a moment. He's telling us to blow it open in a way that can't be covered up. No quiet backroom conversations. No private negotiations. Something that makes it impossible for Voss to make it disappear. That's not a plan, Dex said. That's a direction. It's a starting point, Torres said. She was already somewhere else in her thinking, her eyes moving in the way they moved when she was assembling structure. Pruitt is still active duty. If this goes through official channels, he kills it. Voss has enough property and enough money to tie this up legally for years if he has time to prepare. She tapped the table. Marcus is right. It has to go sideways. And fast, Harlan said, because Voss already knows the crate was disturbed. He'll be moving. Ryder nodded. He picked up the notebook and held it. He looked at Evan, who was sitting at the edge of the table with his hands folded and his face doing something careful and contained. You didn't ask to be part of this, Ryder said. I walked in here, Evan said. You walked in here to find out about your uncle. That's different from, I know what I walked into. Evan met his eyes. I'm not leaving. Ryder studied him. The assessment was not dismissive. It was thorough. The kind of look you gave something you were considering trusting with something that mattered. You're 15, he said. You keep saying that like it changes the math. Something moved through Ryder's expression. Not amusement, something adjacent to it, something that had been in storage for a long time. Okay, he said. Then you stay. But you follow my instructions. No independent action. No going somewhere without telling me where. He looked at the table, at the spread of photographs and documents, and 20 years of one man's careful and lonely work. Because whoever found that crate empty tonight is going to start looking for where it went. And when they find it, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Dex's phone buzzed on the counter. He looked at it. His face changed. Ryder, he said. Ryder looked at him. It's Manny. He was watching the perimeter like you asked. Dex looked up. 3 vehicles. Stopped at the end of the block. Not Voss's guys, that different plates. He ran them. They come back to a shell company connected to a property management firm connected to Voss, Torres said. No. Dex's voice had changed in a way that made everyone in the room go very still. They come back to a company that on paper looks like it has no connection to Voss at all. It's clean, corporate, the kind of clean that takes real money and real lawyers to build. He set the phone down. The kind of clean that means Voss isn't the top of this. The silence this time had a different quality from all the previous silences. It was the silence of a room in which multiple people were simultaneously understanding that the thing they'd thought they were dealing with was smaller than the thing they were actually dealing with. Ryder stood up. He went to the window of the back room that looked onto the alley and stood there without touching the blind, looking at the angle of the street that was visible. Marcus, he said quietly, to the window, to no one and everyone. What did you find? And outside, the 3 vehicles sat with their engines off and their lights off at the end of the block in the rain, waiting with the patience of something that knew it had time. Because whatever was in that notebook, whatever Marcus Calloway had spent 20 years assembling at the cost of his name and his family and his life as he'd known it, it was bigger than one corrupt businessman and one dirty cop. It was something that had resources. Something that could build clean corporate shells and put 3 vehicles on a street in the rain at midnight without breaking a sweat. Something that had been watching for 20 years, the same as Marcus had been watching. And now, it had found what it was watching for. Evan looked at the notebook on the table, at his name on that last page, at the words written to him by a man who had known he existed from a distance that was supposed to keep him safe. If this ever reaches you, Evan, I know you. I've been watching from the only distance that kept you safe. The distance was gone now. There was no safe left. And Evan Calloway, 15 years old, sitting in a biker garage at midnight with 3 unidentified vehicles idling at the end of the block, understood with the specific clarity of someone who has just watched a door close behind them that whatever his life had been before tonight, hard, uncertain, small, survivable, that version of his life was finished. What came next had no map. And the man who might have drawn one was somewhere out there in the dark, watching from a distance that no longer protected anyone. Ryder stepped away from the window. He didn't say anything immediately. He moved back to the table with the deliberate economy of someone who had trained himself across many years and many bad situations to not let his body telegraph what his mind was doing. He picked up his phone. He made a call that lasted 11 seconds, during which he said only, "Back door, now, quiet." Then he set the phone down and looked at Torres. "How long before they move?" he said. Torres was already at the window Ryder had vacated, standing at an angle that let her see without being seen. "They're patient. This isn't surveillance. They're positioned. They've got the front covered and they know about the alley exit, or they're assuming it." She stepped back. 20 minutes, maybe less. "Then we've got 15, Ryder said. Harlan. Harlan was already moving toward the far end of the garage. "I know." Take the notebooks and the documents, not copies, the originals. If we lose them tonight, we lose everything. I know, Ryder. Brick, I'm old, not useless. Brick was on his feet with a steadiness that surprised Evan, given how settled into his chair he'd appeared for the past 2 hours. He pulled his jacket from the back of the chair. I'll take the kid. No, Evan said. 3 people looked at him. I'm not being moved around like evidence, he said. His voice came out more level than he expected, which surprised him. Tell me what's happening, and let me be useful or don't, but I'm not going out a back door with someone I met an hour ago while the rest of you figure out what I helped start. The room held that for a moment. Torres looked at Ryder. Something passed between them that wasn't words. He stays, Ryder said. Brick, take the documents. Use the route through Keller's lot. Don't go home. He looked at Evan. You do exactly what I say, when I say it. No delay, no questions in the moment. We talk after. Okay, Evan said. I mean it. Exactly what I say. I heard you the first time. This time the thing that moved across Ryder's expression was identifiable. It was the specific expression of someone being reminded of a younger version of themselves at a moment that did not allow for the sentiment that recognition produced. He moved to the workbench and opened a drawer and removed something that he tucked into his jacket. Evan didn't ask what it was. He had a reasonable guess, and asking would not improve the situation. Brick gathered the documents, organized them back into the plastic bag with practiced speed, tucked the bag inside his jacket against his body, buttoned the jacket over it. He moved toward the back of the building without ceremony. He touched Evan's shoulder once as he passed. Not gently, not roughly, just a brief pressure, the acknowledgement one person gives another when they don't have time for anything more than acknowledgement. And then he was gone through the door at the back. Harlan had the notebook. He looked at Ryder. The overpass? No, Keen's. Tell him it's a cold hold, but nothing moves, nothing gets opened until I come personally. Harlan nodded and followed Brick. That left Ryder, Torres, Dex, and Evan. The front gate, Torres said. They'll come through the front gate when they come. It's the only approach wide enough for what they'll bring. She looked at Dex. Kill the main light, leave the bay light on. Dex went to the panel on the wall and cut the overhead fluorescence. The garage dropped into the yellow radius of the single bay work light, which threw long shadows and made the space feel simultaneously smaller and more exposed. Ryder looked at Evan. Behind the far workbench, there's a space between the bench and the wall. Get into it and stay low. Ryder, that's the first instruction. Are we good? Evan looked at the workbench. He looked at Ryder. He went to the workbench and folded himself into the space behind it, which smelled like metal and oil and was cold against his back where it met the wall. He could see through the gap between the bench legs, a narrow horizontal slice of the garage floor and the front gate beyond the bay opening. He put his hand in his jacket pocket, found the empty space where the tag had been before he gave it to Ryder. He pressed his palm flat against the inside of his pocket anyway. He waited. They came at 12 minutes. Not from the front gate. From above. The sound was wrong. Not boots on concrete, but something on the roof, a controlled weight moving across the corrugated metal. Evan heard it the same moment Torres did, her head coming up like a compass needle finding north. And then she was saying something low and sharp to Ryder, and Ryder was moving, and the side door of the garage, not the front bay, the side entrance, the one Evan hadn't registered as a vulnerability, came open. One man, then 2. Not large. Not the blunt physical presence Evan had half expected based on the thugs of his imagination. These were lean men, controlled, dressed in dark practical clothing, and they moved through the door with the efficiency of people who had cleared rooms before and found the process unremarkable. Ryder said, loudly, clearly, "Don't!" The first man stopped. The second man stopped. Dex was positioned somewhere in the dark behind them that Evan couldn't see from his angle. Torres was... He didn't know where Torres was, and somehow that was the most reassuring thing in the room. "Hands," Ryder said. The first man raised his hands with the careful precision of someone following a protocol. The second man followed. Neither of them looked afraid. They looked like they were running a calculation. You're not Voss's people, Ryder said. No, the first man said. Who do you work for? That's a longer conversation than this. Make it shorter. The first man looked at Ryder with the assessing calm of someone who had been in enough charged situations to have stopped experiencing them as emotionally significant. We're not here to hurt you or anyone in this building. We're here because the material from the crate under the overpass has surfaced, and there are people with significantly more resources than Gerald Voss who need to know where it is. And who are those people, Ryder said. People who've been trying to protect that material for 8 years. The garage held this statement. Evan, behind the workbench, felt something shift in his chest. Not fear, something more specific than fear. The specific sensation of a story he thought he understood changing shape. You're going to need to do better than that, Ryder said. The first man glanced toward the workbench. Not randomly. Directly. He'd known where Evan was from the moment they'd entered, or he'd found him in the first 3 seconds, which amounted to the same thing. The boy found it, the man said. We know that. We've been watching the overpass for 2 years. We weren't there last night because of the weather. We had a sensor failure on the east approach. He paused. That's a mistake we're going to have to live with. You've been watching the crate, Ryder said slowly. We've been watching for anyone who found it. The crate wasn't supposed to stay there. It was supposed to be retrieved. The person who was going to retrieve it. The man stopped. He and his partner exchanged a look that lasted less than a second. There were complications? What kind of complications? Torres said from somewhere in the dark, and both men recalibrated their spatial awareness in the direction of her voice. The kind, the first man said carefully, that involve a name you're going to need to sit down to hear. I'm already sitting down, Ryder said, which was not true. He was standing, but the meaning was clear. Say the name. The first man looked at Ryder directly. Marcus Calloway, he said. And the way he said it, not past tense, not as a memorial, but as a current fact, as a name that belonged to someone presently existing in the world, landed in the garage like a stone dropped into still water, the rings spreading outward through every person in the room. He's alive, the man said. He's been working with us for 8 years, and 3 days ago, he was taken. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then Ryder moved, not at the men, but to the workbench on the far wall, gripping the edge of it with both hands, his back to the room. His knuckles went white against the metal. He stayed like that for a moment, breathing in a way that was controlled but audible, the breathing of someone managing a physical response to information that had hit him somewhere below the level of thought. Nobody spoke. Evan stayed behind the workbench and watched Ryder's back, and felt something happening in his own chest that he didn't have the vocabulary for. Something that was grief and relief folded into the same moment. 2 things that should have been sequential, instead arriving simultaneously, canceling each other out, and producing a third thing that was neither. Torres stepped out of the dark. She had something in her hand that she lowered when she saw the posture of the 2 men. The calculation she was running clearly arriving at a conclusion about their immediate intentions. Taken by who? She said. By people connected to the organization above Voss, the first man said. Voss is a node. He's been a useful node for a long time. He controls property and access in this district. He has a relationship with Pruitt that gives them a law enforcement buffer. And his original act against Marcus 20 years ago gave them leverage over him. But the people who actually run this operation have been operating in this city for 30 years. Voss knows maybe a third of what they do and none of what they're actually moving through this district. Moving what? Dex said. Money, primarily. Contracts. Permits for development projects that aren't what they appear to be on paper. The industrial corridor here is going to be rezoned in the next 18 months. The value of every property in a 12-block radius is going to increase by a factor of 3 to 5. The people who own those properties now, he let the logic complete itself. Voss, Torres said, and others. Voss is the visible part. He's the part that makes noise and hires men and drives out to garages at night. The rest of it is quieter. The man looked at Ryder's back. Marcus found this 8 years ago. He'd been building the documentation on Voss for years by then. The original case, the framing, the police corruption. But when he followed the thread above Voss, he found something that was too large for him to surface alone. He made contact with us. Who is us? Ryder said. He was still at the workbench, still not turning around. The man hesitated. The hesitation was not evasion. It was the specific pause of someone deciding how much precision the moment required. We're a private investigative organization, nonprofit. We work on municipal corruption cases that official channels won't touch for political reasons. We've been building the case above Voss for 6 years. Marcus's documentation was the foundation. What he collected before we found him gave us the architecture of the whole operation. Ryder turned around. His face was... Evan looked at it and felt for the first time that he was seeing Ryder Kane without the layer of management that the man habitually wore. What was underneath was not what Evan had expected. It was not rage. It was not grief, exactly. It was the expression of someone who had spent 20 years in a particular kind of darkness, the darkness of not knowing, and had just been told that the darkness was over, but had not yet processed what light looked like. 3 days ago, Ryder said. You said he was taken 3 days ago. Yes? By who specifically? We believe by contractors working for the organization, not Voss's people, the tier above. Voss's people came here tonight because they know the crate was disturbed and they're nervous. The people who took Marcus don't know about the crate yet. When they find out, the man looked at the workbench where the documents had been. Where is the material? Somewhere you won't find it, Ryder said. Kane, no. Ryder's voice had found its floor again. The management was back, but different now. Not the management of someone suppressing feeling, but the management of someone who had felt what they needed to feel and was now operating from it rather than around it. You've been working with my brother for 8 years. 8 years, and you didn't... Nobody contacted me. Nobody... He stopped, started again. He knew where I was. He knew everything about what I was doing. He had someone watching this building. His voice didn't rise. It was the flat voice of someone pressing on a bruise to confirm it was there. Why? The first man held Ryder's gaze. He didn't tell you because telling you would have put you in the middle of something that wasn't survivable with 2 people. He needed you outside of it. He needed the club outside of it. He paused. He also needed to know you were here, that the club was intact, that there was somewhere for the boy to come. The word landed differently the second time it was applied to Evan. Evan said from behind the workbench. He planned this. Everyone looked toward him. He planned it, Evan said again. He was sitting on the floor of the garage, back against the cold wall, and he was working through something that had the texture of a proof, the kind that revealed its answer in the middle of the working, not at the end. He hid the crate where I'd find it, where someone would find it. He wrote the notebook for whoever came. He knew, he had to have known, that if something happened to him, the crate would eventually surface. He built it as a backup. He looked at the first man. He built it as a way to activate the people who could finish what he started, if he couldn't finish it himself. The first man looked at Evan with an expression that moved, briefly, almost invisibly, into something that was not professional assessment, something more personal. Yes, he said. He used me, Evan said. And then before anyone could respond to the flatness of that, not badly, I don't mean it badly, I mean he calculated that I would come, that I'd care enough to come. He counted on it, the first man said quietly. He told us 2 years ago when we were assessing contingencies, he said, my nephew will find it. He'll know what to do with it because he's the kind of person who figures out what needs to be done and does it without waiting to be told. He paused. He was right. Evan sat with this for a moment. His uncle, who had never met him, who had watched him from a distance, had described him to strangers with more accuracy than any adult who had actually been present in his life had ever managed. He pressed his palm against the inside of his jacket pocket. Ryder brought the 2 men into the back office. Torres stayed in the garage bay with a sight line to the front gate. Dex moved to the roof through an interior access point that Evan hadn't noticed, and which suggested the Iron Wolves had designed their space with the understanding that the need for elevated observation might arise. The first man gave his name as Sorrel. The second man, younger and quieter, was introduced only as his partner. Sorrel spread a folded map on the back office table. The map was of the industrial district, annotated in a way that added layers of information over the printed geography. Marked properties, connections drawn between addresses, a network rendered in ink on paper. Marcus was taken from a location in the western corridor, Sorrel said. He pointed. He'd been meeting a former Voss employee who'd agreed to provide additional documentation. The meeting was compromised. We believe there's an informant inside our organization, someone who knew the meeting details. He said this without visible distress, with the flatness of someone reporting a mechanical failure. We've been locked down since. No internal communication. Whoever took him has him at one of 3 possible locations, based on property ownership tracing. You haven't moved on any of them, Ryder said. We can't. Not without triggering the kind of response that ends with Marcus dead and all the evidence buried. It requires a different approach. Sorrel looked at Ryder. It requires people who operate outside the channels they're watching. People who can move in this district without raising the flags that our people raise when we move. Ryder understood. Evan could see that he understood. You need the club. I need you specifically, Sorrel said. The Iron Wolves have the history in this district. You service bikes, you know every road and alley, you have relationships with people in this corridor that took years to build. You're invisible in a way we're not. He looked at the map. And Marcus trusted you. Whatever happens in the next 48 hours, and it needs to happen in the next 48 hours, because after that the window closes. It needs someone Marcus trusted absolutely. Someone who has a reason beyond professional obligation to bring him back. The room was quiet. Ryder looked at the map for a long time. The 3 locations, he said. Which one? We think the most likely is the Aldrin Cold Storage Facility, northeast corner of the corridor. Voss has a Shell ownership stake. It's been listed as inactive for 3 years, but our surveillance shows regular activity on the east side of the building, night hours only. I know Aldrin, Ryder said. I know the man who used to run it before Voss bought in. And I know a road that runs behind the east loading dock that isn't on any current map because it was rerouted 6 years ago and the old route was fenced off. He looked at Sorrel. Still a chain-link fence, not a wall. You've been in that area recently. I ride this district every week. I've been riding it for 25 years. He said it without pride, as a fact. You don't know this city, you know what's on paper about this city. Sorrel absorbed this without defensiveness. That's accurate. Then here's how this works, Ryder said. You give me everything you have on the 3 locations. Layouts, known personnel, access points, whatever your surveillance has produced. I take that to my people and we build an approach. You stay out of it. If we find Marcus, we call you and you handle the legal documentation, the exposure, whatever mechanism you've built to make this public. He looked at Sorrel directly. The evidence in that notebook goes public. All of it. Voss, Pruitt, the organization above them. You have something built for that? We have a journalist, national publication. She's been waiting for the package for 2 years. The moment we give her the complete documentation with Marcus as a corroborating witness, when, Ryder said, hours, not days. Then that's the deal. Ryder extended his hand across the map. We get Marcus. You make it loud. Sorrel shook his hand. We have a problem first. One? Pruitt, Sorrel said. Lieutenant Pruitt knows the crate was disturbed. By morning, he'll have connected it to you, to this garage, to Evan coming here tonight. If he acts before we can move on Aldrin, Pruitt won't move on the Iron Wolves without paperwork, Ryder said. He's dirty, but he's careful. It'll take him until morning minimum to build a pretext. Unless he doesn't need a pretext, Sorrel said. Unless whoever is above Voss tells him that the situation has moved beyond careful. The weight of this settled over the room like weather. Dex's voice came from the ceiling, from the access point above them, quiet and flat. Ryder, we've got a problem. Everyone looked up. Brick's phone just went dark, Dex said. He was on the Keller's lot route. Phone was active until 4 minutes ago and then stopped. No one moved for a moment. Then Torres came in from the garage bay. She looked at Ryder. The look contained the situation in its entirety. He had the documents, she said. I know, Ryder said. If they took him before he got to a safe location, I know, Torres. The room processed this with the speed of people who had processed bad news before and understood that the processing had to be fast. Brick, who was somewhere between a father figure and a fixed star in the Iron Wolves constellation, who had been with the club since before Evan was born, who had known his father, who had known Marcus, was not answering his phone on a route that should have taken 15 minutes. Evan stood up from behind the workbench. He had been sitting on the garage floor for the past 20 minutes, which had left him cold and stiff, and he stood up with the particular determination of someone who was done being positioned at the edge of things. "The documents," he said, "right? Brick has the documents and the notebook is with Harlan going to Keene's. If they took Brick, then they have partial documentation," Ryder said. "Not the notebook." "Is partial documentation enough to hurt the case?" Sorrell answered. "If they have the financial records and the witness lists, yes, critically." He looked at the map. "And if they know they have it, they'll move on Marcus before we can." The timeline, which had been 48 hours, had just become something significantly shorter, and everyone in the room understood this simultaneously, which produced a particular kind of silence. The silence of people recalibrating in real time, feeling the ground shift under a plan that hadn't been fully built yet. Ryder looked at Evan, and in that look was something that hadn't been there at the beginning of the night. Not the careful assessment of a stranger, not the managed expression of someone deciding how much to reveal, but something rawer and more direct. The look of someone who had run out of the distance that made management possible. "Your name is in the notebook," Ryder said, "that page specifically. If they read the notebook, they know I exist," Evan said. "They know you found the crate. They know you came here. They know—" He stopped. Something moved across his face. "Carl Siver's address is on your foster records, which are in a system that Pruitt can access." The cold that moved through Evan had nothing to do with the temperature of the garage. "Carl Siver's house," Evan said. "You need to not be there," Ryder said. "Tonight. Tomorrow. However long this takes." He looked at Torres, and something passed between them. "You stay here, under this roof." "They'll come here," Sorrell said. "This location is already compromised." "They'll come here anyway," Torres said. "Running doesn't help. We need to move before they move, and we can't do that from a secondary location we've had no time to prepare." Ryder picked up his phone. He called Harlan. The phone rang 4 times, and then Harlan's voice came through, terse and quiet. "I'm at Keene's. Package is secure. Stay there. Don't open anything. Don't talk to anyone. I'll call you in an hour." He ended the call. He looked at Sorrell. "I need your 3 locations. Layouts, personnel counts, access point assessments, everything." Sorrell reached into his jacket and produced a folded set of papers. Ryder took them and spread them on the table next to the map. He studied them. 30 seconds. A minute. The rest of the room waited in the particular way that people wait when the person doing the thinking is the person whose thinking matters. Then Ryder looked up. His face had completed some process that had been running underneath everything else for the past hour. The grief was not gone. Evan didn't think it was the kind of thing that went anywhere quickly. But it had been sorted, filed into a place that was accessible but not active. What was active was something older and quieter and significantly more dangerous. "Torres," he said, "I need 6 people. People who can move at 3 in the morning without leaving a trace and without asking questions that slow things down." "I can get you 4 by 2 a.m., she said. 6 by 3. 4 by 2 is enough if they're the right 4. He looked at Dex. "Get down from there. I need you here." Then he looked at Evan. His eyes held on Evan for a moment with an expression that had no single name, that contained about 6 things at once. That was the expression of someone seeing something they'd stopped expecting to see. "Your uncle built this for years," Ryder said. "Every piece of it. The documentation, the contingency plan, the thing he left under the bridge. He built it, and he built it right, and he trusted that when it mattered, the people on the other end would be able to use it." He paused. He was right, but using it means tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight we move and we get him back, and then this whole thing comes apart the way he always meant it to. Evan met his eyes. "What do you need me to do?" "Right now, nothing. You sit, you stay close, and when I tell you to move, you move." He picked up his jacket from the chair and put it on. The worn leather, the Iron Wolves patch, the weight of a 20-year history in every crease of it. "Later, after we get Marcus back, after this goes public, I'm going to need you to tell your story. What you found, where, how, why you came here. Because the part of this story that gets people to pay attention is the part where a 15-year-old kid with nothing found the thing that broke the whole operation open. He buttoned the jacket. That's the story Marcus wrote when he put your name in that notebook. That's the story he was counting on. He was counting on a lot, Evan said. He was counting on you, Ryder said. There's a difference. And then outside, from the direction of the street, from the direction of the block where 3 vehicles had been sitting with their engines and their lights off for the past hour, came a sound. Not an engine starting, not tires on wet asphalt. A single gunshot, flat and definite in the rain-heavy air, swallowed almost immediately by the sound of the downpour, but present, unmistakably present, arriving through the walls of the garage with the clarity of something that ended one thing and began another. Torres was at the window. "The vehicles are moving," she said. And then, a second later, with a different quality in her voice, the quality of someone reporting a fact they have not finished processing. "Ryder, someone's walking toward the gate." "Boss's people?" "No." She turned from the window. Her face had done something Evan had not seen it do in the hours he'd been watching it. "It's a man, walking alone. He's hurt. He's not from the vehicles. He's coming from the other direction." Ryder was at the window in 3 steps. Evan stood up. He didn't go to the window. There wasn't room, and he'd agreed to follow instructions. But he watched Ryder's face, watched it go through something seismic and silent, watched it do what it had done when Evan first showed him the tag, except this time larger. This time without recovery. This time the thing that moved through Ryder Kane's face did not settle back into anything like stillness, because there was nothing left to settle. Just the raw, open fact of it, everything stripped down to the single most basic thing a person could feel when they were looking at something they had believed for 20 years was gone from the world. Ryder moved toward the gate before anyone could say anything to him. Torres said, "Ryder, the vehicles." "I know," he said, and kept walking. Evan looked through the gap between Torres and the window frame and saw him, a man in the rain, moving slowly with the gait of someone navigating serious pain, his left arm held against his body, his face turned toward the light from the garage bay. Dark-haired, going gray, a jaw that Evan had seen in 6 photographs spread across a table 20 feet away. The particular set of his shoulders, even injured, even moving through pain, even after 20 years, the same as the man mid-laugh on the motorcycle. The same, unmistakably, as the man Evan saw in his own face when he looked in the mirror. The jaw, the eyes, the shape of something underneath the surface that had survived everything that had been done to erase it. The gate opened. Ryder caught him before he reached the ground, and Marcus Calloway, alive and bleeding and 20 years gone, said something into his brother's shoulder that Evan couldn't hear through the rain and the glass and the distance. But he saw Ryder's response. Both arms coming around, holding on with the specific desperation of someone who had just been given back something they'd stopped allowing themselves to want. And he didn't need to hear the words. He knew what they were. He'd been carrying his own version of them since the moment he'd read his own name in a dead man's notebook, and understood that the dead man had known he existed and had called him forward across the years and the distance and the silence of 20 years, had trusted him to find the right door and walk through it. What he hadn't known, what none of them had known until 30 seconds ago, was that Marcus had also been walking toward this, the whole time, from both directions. Outside, the 3 vehicles that had been sitting in the rain at the end of the block accelerated. Not away, toward. Their headlights came on simultaneously, sweeping the front of the garage with the cold white light of something that was done being patient. And Evan Calloway stood in the window of the Iron Wolves garage with his dead uncle's motorcycle tag not in his pocket, but somewhere safer than his pocket now, held by the man who had made it and the man it had been made for. And he understood that whatever he had been before tonight, frightened, small, surviving, was not what he was anymore. He did not know yet what he was instead. But the vehicles were coming, and there was no version of the next 10 minutes that would let him stay the same person he'd been when he walked through that gate. Ryder got Marcus inside in 30 seconds. Not gently. There was no time for gentle. He pulled his brother's arm over his shoulder and moved him through the gate and across the garage floor with the focused brutality of someone prioritizing survival over comfort, and Marcus went with it, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts that told Evan he was managing pain that was serious but not yet critical. "Dex," Ryder said. Dex was already moving. He pulled the rolling tool cart aside to reveal a floor panel, lifted it, and the smell of cold concrete and motor oil came up from below. A crawl space, low and dark, with what appeared to be a narrow passage running toward the back of the building. "Not the crawl space," Marcus said. His voice was rougher than Evan had imagined from the photographs, from the handwriting, from the man who had existed until 3 minutes ago only as documentation. "I'm not going in a hole. Not again." "Marcus?" "Ryder." He said his brother's name with a weight that stopped the conversation. "I didn't walk here in the rain to hide in a hole." Ryder looked at him. Something passed between them in that look. 20 years of absence compressed into 3 seconds of eye contact. Something that was argument and grief and relief all running on the same track. Then Ryder straightened. "Back office," he said. "Torres." Torres was already at the cabinet under the sink in the back office. She came out with a first aid kit and the practiced efficiency of someone who had used it before in situations that did not allow for squeamishness. She looked at Marcus's left arm, at the way he was holding it, and said, "GSW." "Through and through," Marcus said. "Upper arm, missed everything important." "You don't know that." "I've had worse." "That's not reassuring." She cut the sleeve of his jacket open with the efficiency of someone making a decision about property versus function. The wound was visible now. An entry and exit, both clean, bleeding steadily, but not arterially. "Sit down." He sat. He looked at Evan. Evan was standing in the doorway between the garage and the back office, and Marcus Calloway looked at him with the specific expression of someone seeing a person they have known from a distance for years, and are now seen in 3 dimensions for the first time. It was not the expression Evan had expected. He hadn't known what to expect. Something dramatic, maybe. Something that matched the weight of the notebook and the years and the distance. Instead, Marcus looked at him the way you looked at something you'd been carrying in your memory and were now checking against reality, quietly calibrating. "You're taller than I thought," Marcus said. Evan didn't know what he'd planned to say in this moment. What came out was, "You knew my name." "I knew your name before you had it. Your dad called me the week you were born." He stopped while Torres pressed a clean cloth to the wound, and he processed the pain of this with a tightening around the eyes and nothing else. He said, "I'm naming him Marcus whether you like it or not." I told him that was a terrible idea. He did it anyway. He looked at Evan steadily. "That was the last time your father and I talked." The weight of this landed in the room. Outside, the headlights of 3 vehicles swept across the front of the building. "Later," Ryder said, to both of them, to the conversation that was trying to happen in a room that didn't have room for it yet. He went back to the garage. Sorrel had moved to the front window with a device that Evan didn't recognize. Small, handheld, the kind of equipment that did not come from consumer electronics, and was watching the vehicles through it with the focused attention of someone translating visual information into tactical data. 3 vehicles, he said, 2 SUVs and a panel van. The van is the problem. That's not surveillance capacity, that's transport. "Transport for what?" Dex said. Sorrel lowered the device. He looked at Ryder. "They're not here to ask questions. They're here to clean the site." He said it flatly, without softening it. The notebook surfaced. Marcus got out. "They're calculating losses and they're here to eliminate variables." "We're the variables," Dex said. "You, Marcus, the documentation, and anyone who's been in contact with any of it tonight." He looked toward the back office, including the boy. Ryder said nothing. His hands were at his sides and his jaw was set, and he was looking at the vehicles through the rain-streaked window with the particular stillness of someone who has arrived at a decision and is now simply waiting for the moment to act on it. "How many people?" Ryder said. "The SUVs carry 4 each maximum. The van I can't assess." Sorrel paused. "This is a significant deployment. These are not Voss's street-level people. The organization above him is treating this as a priority extraction." "How many do we have?" You, Dex, Torres, your 4 people aren't here yet. Harlan's at Keen's. 1 call away, Torres said from the back office doorway. Sorrel's partner, Ryder said. Ready, the younger man said from the corner of the room where he had been quiet for the past 20 minutes in the way that very competent people were quiet in situations that hadn't yet required them to be otherwise. Ryder did the math. The math was not favorable, and he knew it, and Evan could see that he knew it, and that this information was being filed in the same place as all the other unfavorable information of the night. The place where things that couldn't be changed went so that the energy spent on them didn't bleed into the things that could. We can't hold this position, Ryder said. That's first. If they move on the building, we don't have the numbers. He turned from the window. We don't hold. We move. He looked at Torres. Can Marcus move? He shouldn't. Torres. Can he move? She came to the door. If he has to. He has to. Ryder went to the back office. He stood in the doorway and looked at his brother, who was sitting with his arm bandaged and his face carrying the specific exhaustion of someone who had been running for a very long time and had just stopped and was feeling for the first time how tired they were. The route behind Aldrin Cold Storage, the old road, the rerouted section. Marcus looked up. You know about that. I ride this district. Something moved across Marcus's face. Not a smile, something adjacent to it, something that arrived and left quickly, but left a mark. Chain link fence, east loading dock side. There's a maintenance door on the south face of the building that's on a separate electrical circuit from the main security system. Hasn't been upgraded in 3 years because Voss's property management company keeps delaying the permit. You know that building. I've been watching it for 8 months, before they took me. He shifted his weight and worked to control what that movement cost him. It's where they're holding the Voss employee, the one who is going to give us the additional documentation. He's been there since before me. The room received this new piece of information and redistributed it into the architecture of everything else. There's someone else in there, Torres said. His name is Creedy, Nathan Creedy. He's 62 years old and he worked property management for Voss for 19 years. And he kept records because he was afraid of what he was seeing and he didn't know what to do with the fear except document it. Marcus looked at his hands. He reached out to me. He sent a letter to a drop address I'd maintained for years. It took 3 months before I trusted it enough to respond. He paused. They took him 6 weeks before they took me. They know he has records they haven't found. They've been... He stopped. He's been there for 6 weeks. 6 weeks in a decommissioned cold storage facility while the organization that put him there decided what to do with him. Nobody in the room said anything for a moment. Then Dex said, very quietly, "We're going to Aldrin." It wasn't a question. It wasn't addressed to Ryder specifically. It was the statement of a conclusion that the room had reached collectively, the way rooms full of people who trusted each other reached conclusions, not through deliberation, but through simultaneous arrival. Ryder looked at his brother. "You stay here." "No." Marcus, Ryder. The same weight as before, the weight of a name used by someone who has earned the right to use it in a specific way. I've been running from this for 20 years. I've been watching it from a distance and building cases and being careful and protecting everyone by staying invisible. And 3 days ago, they found me anyway and took me and I got out because I got lucky, not because I was careful. He stood up. The effort of it was visible, and he made no attempt to conceal it, which was somehow more impressive than concealing it would have been. I'm done being invisible. I'm done being the version of this that stays back. Ryder looked at him for a long time. "You can't hold a bike," he said finally. "Then I ride with you." Another long moment. Then Ryder turned to the room. "We go out the back. The panel on Dex's left. It opens into the Keller's lot access. Bikes go out that way. We leave the building empty." He looked at Sorrel. "You have a vehicle?" "On Renner Street, 2 blocks east." "Good. You take Marcus and the boy." "I'm not..." Evan started. "You're not on a bike in a running situation, Evan. That's not negotiation, that's physics." Ryder's voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone who had moved past the point where kindness and operational necessity were in conflict and had resolved it. "You go with Sorrel. You stay with Marcus. If anything happens to us, nothing's going to happen to you," Evan said. Ryder looked at him. If anything happens to us, you and Marcus get to Harlan at Keene's and you stay there until morning. The journalist Sorrel mentioned, her contact information is in the notebook. You make the call yourself if you have to. Evan looked at him, looked at Marcus, who was watching this exchange with an expression that was complicated and quiet. Looked at the motorcycle tag, which was now in Ryder's jacket pocket. He'd seen Ryder put it there when he got Marcus inside, had seen the specific care with which he'd tucked it away, the gesture of someone returning something to where it had always belonged. Okay, Evan said. Ryder nodded once. He looked at Dex, at Torres, at Sorrel's partner. Let's go. Nityam. The back panel opened onto a narrow access corridor that ran between the Iron Wolves building and the fence of Keller's lot. The motorcycles were there. 3 of them, pulled through at some point in the past hour by someone following Ryder's earlier instructions, lined up in the corridor with the quiet readiness of animals that had been kept still and were prepared to stop being still. The rain had not stopped. It had settled into the kind of steady fall that was not dramatic but was total, the kind that soaked through everything eventually and turned the world into a collection of surfaces that reflected light without warmth. Ryder mounted his bike without ceremony. Dex and Torres mounted theirs. The engines started, not simultaneously, staggered, because staggered starts were quieter, and quieter was better for the next 30 seconds while they were still in the corridor and the vehicles at the front of the building hadn't yet registered that the building they were watching had become empty. Evan went with Sorrel and Marcus through the far end of the corridor onto the Keller's lot access road, moving on foot to Renner Street. Sorrel's vehicle was a dark gray sedan, unremarkable, the kind of vehicle that existed specifically to be unremarkable. Marcus got in the back. Evan got in beside him. Sorrel's partner took the wheel. Aldrin, Sorrel said. The partner pulled onto Renner Street without lights for the first half block, then brought the headlights up and drove at the speed of someone who knew that the most conspicuous thing you could do in a vehicle was drive too carefully. Evan looked at Marcus beside him. In the confined space of the sedan's back seat, with the ambient light of street lamps moving across him as they drove, Marcus Calloway looked like what he was. A man in his early 50s who had spent 20 years making choices that had cost him everything they'd cost him, and had continued making them anyway. The wound in his arm was bandaged and his jacket was draped over his shoulders. His face was the face from the photographs, aged forward into something that had more lines but was not diminished by them. You read the whole notebook, Marcus said. Most of it. The part about watching you. Yes. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Outside, the industrial corridor moved past the windows. Dark buildings, chain-link fencing, the occasional yellow light of a facility that ran overnight. I want you to know, he said, that watching from a distance was not what I wanted. It was what I calculated was safest. For your dad, for you. For as long as your dad was... He stopped. I thought if I surfaced, if I made contact, the people watching me would use it, would use all of you as leverage. He looked at the window. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just afraid. Maybe both, Evan said. Marcus glanced at him. The expression that moved across his face at this, at the directness of it, at the absence of softness around it, was the expression of someone being seen clearly by a person they hadn't expected to see them clearly. Yeah, Marcus said, maybe both. They drove in silence for a moment. Then Evan said, The notebook. You wrote my name in it. Yes. You told those people, Sorrel's organization, that I would find it. Yes. You were counting on me. I was. No apology in it, no deflection. You were the contingency I trusted most. Not because you're exceptional, though you might be, I don't know you well enough yet, but because you had the most reason to come looking. He paused. People do remarkable things when they have a reason. Your father had reasons and he made terrible choices with them. I hoped you'd do something different with yours. Evan sat with this, with the weight of being someone's contingency, with the complicated feeling of being trusted by a stranger who was not a stranger, who had known his name before he had it, who had watched him from a distance too far to touch, who had written him into a plan as the piece most likely to hold. "What if I hadn't found it?" Evan said. "The crate. Someone would have." Eventually, Marcus shifted, adjusting his arm carefully. "But I thought it would be you. I put it where the camp was, and the camp moved around that area seasonally, and I knew—" He stopped. "I knew something about your situation, from your father, in letters, before he stopped writing. I knew you'd been placed in that district. I knew you sometimes—" He stopped again. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to say this without it sounding like I was tracking you like a variable." "You were tracking me like a variable," Evan said. "Yes, and I'm sorry for that. And also, it worked, and you're here, and I don't know how to hold both of those things at the same time, except just to hold them both." Evan looked out the window. The Aldrin cold storage facility was visible now, a large, low building on the northeast corner, its signage dark, its parking lot empty under the rain. "We're going to talk more," Evan said. "After." "After," Marcus agreed. "A lot more." "I know. About everything." "I know," Marcus said. And his voice, for the first time since he'd walked through the gate bleeding and 20 years late, had something in it that was not pain or exhaustion or the managed gravity of someone carrying an enormous weight. Something lighter. Something that was the beginning of what it felt like when a weight you'd been carrying alone was no longer entirely yours to carry. Sorrel's partner parked on the service road behind Aldrin, on the dark section of the old rerouted access road, the chain-link fence 20 meters ahead of them. The fence was chain-link, as Ryder had said. Not a wall, not electrified, not surveilled from this angle based on Sorrel's assessment, which he delivered in the final 2 minutes of the drive with the economy of someone translating surveillance data into operational language. The motorcycles arrived 90 seconds later. Ryder pulled up beside the sedan and cut the engine. Dex and Torres flanked. All three of them were wet and present, and the engines ticked in the cooling rain air like clocks counting down. Ryder came to Evan's window. Evan lowered it. "Harlan's on his way," Ryder said quietly. 5 minutes. "When he gets here, you and Marcus stay at the vehicle." He looked at his brother through the window. Marcus said, "Ryder, we talked about this. We talked about the bike. I'm not on a bike." He opened the sedan door. He got out. He stood in the rain and faced his brother across the roof of the car with his bandaged arm and his borrowed jacket and 20 years between them. "Tell me I'm not going in." Ryder looked at him for a long moment. "Stay behind me," he said. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. Harlan arrived in 4 minutes. He cut his engine at the edge of the access road and came to the group with the long-legged quiet of someone who had been activated and was now simply present and ready. And he looked at Marcus in the rain and did something that Evan had not seen Harlan do in any of the hours they'd shared. He put his hand on Marcus's shoulder and gripped it once and then released it, and the entirety of what that gesture contained was communicated in the second it lasted and required no additional language. Torres assessed the fence. "Wire cutters in the left saddlebag," she said, to no one in particular, and retrieved them. The fence took 40 seconds. Torres worked with practiced speed, cutting a flap large enough to move through quickly, folding it back and securing the corners so it held its shape. Ryder looked at the group, Dex, Torres, Harlan, Sorrel, and his partner Marcus. He looked at Evan last. "Here's the line," Ryder said. He was not speaking loudly. The rain in the distance from the building meant he didn't need to. "We go in through the maintenance door on the south face. Marcus says it's on a separate circuit. We get in quiet. We locate Creddy, and we locate anyone else being held in there. We get them out before we do anything else. Nothing happens until those people are out." He looked at each face in the group. Questions. Nobody asked one. "How many inside?" Harlan said. Sorrel answered. "Our surveillance before Marcus was taken showed 2 to 4 rotating personnel. Tonight, with the deployment at your garage, they may have drawn down the internal complement, or they may have added to it." He paused. "We don't know." "So we don't know," Dex said. "We don't know," Sorrel confirmed. "Okay," Dex said, with the tone of someone who had cataloged this uncertainty and placed it accurately. Ryder looked at Evan. "You stay at the vehicle." Evan looked back at him. He had his arguments ready. He'd been assembling them in the car, had them organized, had the responses to Ryder's counter-arguments prepared. He looked at Ryder's face and at Marcus's face and at the building ahead of them in the rain, and he put the arguments away. "I'll be here," he said. Ryder held his gaze for a moment. Then he turned toward the fence. The group moved through the cut section in single file. Evan watched them go. Ryder first, then Harlan, then Torres, then Dex, then Sorrel and his partner, then Marcus last, slower than the others. One arm not functioning at full capacity, his pace adjusted but his direction absolute. They crossed the open ground between the fence and the south face of the Aldrin building and disappeared into the dark adjacent to the maintenance store. Evan sat on the hood of the sedan in the rain and watched the building and listened. The rain was the loudest thing. Then the distant sound of traffic from the main road, far enough away to be ambient rather than specific. Then nothing for a full 2 minutes. Then, from inside the building, faint, muffled by the walls and the weather but present, the sound of something breaking. Not glass. Something heavier. A door, maybe, or furniture, or the specific sound of a confrontation beginning its physical phase. Evan was off the hood and moving toward the fence before he'd made a decision about it. He stopped himself at the cut section. His hand was on the chain link. The wire was cold and wet under his fingers. He stood there, holding the fence, listening to the building. A shout, indistinct but sharp, the directed syllable of someone issuing a command or a warning. Then engines. From the front of the building, from the main access road, the sound of vehicles arriving, not quietly, not carefully, with the committed speed of people responding to a signal. The 3 vehicles from the garage. They'd figured out the building was empty, and they'd triangulated. Evan counted the sound of engines, 2 SUVs and a van. The same deployment that had arrived at the garage, now here, now pulling into the Aldrin facility from the front, while Ryder and the others were somewhere inside moving toward Creati. They were going to be caught between the arrivals from the front and whatever was inside. Evan let go of the fence. He pulled out his phone. He called Ryder's number, and it rang and didn't connect. Inside the building, or the rain, or the noise of whatever was happening inside that building, making it impossible to feel a phone vibrating. He called Dex. Same result. He called Torres. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was compressed and immediate. "What?" "Vehicles from the garage just pulled into the front of the facility," Evan said. "Same deployment. They followed you." A pause of approximately 1 second. Then Torres's voice away from the phone, flat and sharp. "Front approach. 2 SUVs and a van. Now." Then back to Evan. "How long?" "They're in the parking lot now. 90 seconds to the front entrance." "We've got Creati. We're at the south face interior, 30 meters from the maintenance store." He heard her moving, heard the sound of the group around her reconfiguring. "Evan, can you create a distraction on the east side of the building? Something that draws attention east. We need 20 seconds of confusion." He looked around the access road, the sedan, the motorcycles, their engines cold, the fence, his own body, and whatever it was worth. "Yes," he said. "Go," Torres said. He went. He pushed through the cut fence section at a run and crossed the open ground toward the east face of the building. There was a row of old loading bay doors on the east side, all sealed, all dark. Above the third bay door was an external security light fixture, inactive. The facility's power was partially off, running on minimal systems. But beside the fourth bay door was an active fixture, a single yellow safety light burning at head height, and below it an external electrical panel, the kind of gray metal utility box that appeared on industrial buildings everywhere and contained, in Evan's experience from a year of living in buildings with deferred maintenance, breakers that were not always properly secured. He reached the panel. It was padlocked. He looked around. Found, against the wall 3 meters away, a length of metal conduit, discarded, the kind of thing that ended up outside buildings and was never quite cleared away. He picked it up. He looked at the padlock. He hit the padlock. The sound of metal on metal in the rain quiet of the east side of the building was not subtle. The padlock didn't give. He hit it again, and it still didn't give, but the sound was significant, and he hit it a third time, and on the third time something gave, not the padlock, but the hasp mount, old and rusted, pulling out of the panel door with a sound like a gunshot. The panel swung open. He found the main breaker. He didn't know if cutting it would help or hurt what was happening inside. He didn't know enough about the building's security systems, its internal lighting, what Ryder and Torres could use and couldn't use in terms of darkness and confusion. He made a decision. He didn't cut the main. He found the breaker labeled EXT Light South, the external lighting on the south face, above the maintenance door, the exit point. He cut it. Then he found EXT Light East and cut that too, taking out the yellow safety light above him, plunging the east face into total darkness. Then he took the conduit and he hit the exterior panel housing as hard as he could, 3 times, fast, creating a racket that bounced off the building's face and carried, he hoped, around the corner to the front where the vehicles had just arrived. He heard shouting from the front of the building. He ran. Back toward the south face, back through the darkness he'd just created, moving fast across uneven ground in the rain, unable to see clearly, navigating by the shape of the building against the sky. He hit the corner of the south face with his shoulder, too hard, pain lighting up his arm and side, and turned the corner, and there was the maintenance door, and it was open, and Torres was in the doorway with Harlan beside her, and a man between them who was not a member of the Iron Wolves, who was smaller and older, and moving with the fragile urgency of someone who had been confined for 6 weeks and was now being moved through a door into cold, wet air, and was receiving this as the most significant thing that had happened to him in a very long time. Nathan Crieti, 62 years old, 19 years of records kept out of fear. Torres looked at Evan arriving at a run from the east face. "What did you do?" "Created a distraction," Evan said, breathing hard. "The bang the panel and cut the lights kind of distraction." It was what was available. Torres looked at him with an expression that would have been, in a different context, appreciation. In this context, it was something faster and more urgent. "It bought us about 45 seconds. Move." They moved. Ryder came through the maintenance door last, backward, watching the interior corridor behind him. He pulled the door shut. He turned and took in the scene. Crieti between Harlan and Torres, Evan present and unexplained, the fence 20 meters away, the vehicles at the front of the building 60 meters around the corner and closing on the east noise. And he processed all of it in the 2 seconds of stillness before he said, "Fence! Now! Everyone!" They ran. Not panic running, the organized urgency of people who had identified the path and were executing it. Harlan taking Crieti's arm and managing his pace, Torres taking the outside position, Dex already through the fence and holding the cut section open, Sorrel and his partner flanking. Marcus ran beside Ryder. Slower than the others, his injured arm held tight against his body, his jaw set against whatever the impact of movement was costing him. Ryder ran beside him at his speed, not ahead, not watching him from a position of safety, just beside him. The way you ran with someone, the way you didn't leave someone behind. Evan ran and felt the cold air tearing into his lungs and the wet ground trying to take his feet and the rain driving sideways into his face, and none of it registering as obstacles, just as texture, just as the specific physical reality of a moment that was happening and that he was inside of, and that required everything he had and was getting it. He went through the fence. Dex went through last and pulled the flap back into place. Not perfectly, but enough that a casual look from a distance wouldn't immediately identify it as a cut. They reached the vehicles. Everyone in. Torres made a count by touching shoulders. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All present. Crieti was in the sedan with Marcus and Evan and Sorrel. He was breathing in shallow, rapid increments. The breathing of someone whose body had been running on emergency systems and was now attempting to locate a different mode. He was looking at his hands in his lap. He looked up once at Evan, and his eyes were red-rimmed, and his face had the texture of someone who had been somewhere very dark and was working out whether the light they were currently in was real. "You're safe," Evan said. He didn't know if it was true. He said it anyway. Crieti looked at him. "Who are you?" he said. "My name is Evan Calloway." Something moved across the old man's face. Calloway, Marcus is my uncle. Creddy looked at Marcus across the seat. Then he looked back at Evan. His mouth worked for a moment without producing sound. Then he said, he talked about you. When they had us in the same location for the first 2 days. He talked about you. He stopped. He said you'd come. He said there was a kid who would come and find what needed finding. He shook his head slowly. I didn't believe him. The vehicles pulled out onto the access road. No headlights for the first 100 meters. The sound of shouting from the direction of the Aldrin facility's front was audible for a moment and then not, as the road curved and the building fell behind them. Ryder's motorcycle pulled alongside the sedan for a moment, just long enough for Evan to see him through the window, rain running off his jacket, eyes forward, moving, always moving, and then accelerated ahead. Evan turned back to look through the rear window at the Aldrin cold storage facility, receding in the rain. The front of the building was lit up now, the 3 vehicles' headlights, figures moving in the wet, the confusion of an arrival that had found noise and darkness and a cut fence and a maintenance door and nothing else. He turned forward. Marcus was looking at him, that same expression from before, the calibration of someone matching a mental image to a physical reality. What? Evan said. Nothing, Marcus said. You did well. I hit a panel with a pipe. You created the window we needed. It was what was available, Evan said, for the second time. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then, that's the whole job. Seeing what's available and using it. Outside, the rain was finally starting to ease, not stopping, easing. The particular shift in weather that preceded the end of something, the rain pulling back from its committed totality into something more provisional, something that suggested it was reconsidering. Ryder's motorcycle was ahead of them, its single taillight red in the wet dark. And behind them, the Aldrin building's lights, all of them, full power now, someone having found the main breaker, blazed into the night like something that had been forced into the open, like something that could no longer afford to pretend to be dark. In the sedan, between the uncle who had watched from a distance and the old man who had kept records out of fear, Evan Calloway sat with rain-wet clothes and a bruised shoulder and hands that had stopped shaking sometime in the past 20 minutes without him noticing. And he understood that the distance between who he had been this morning and who he was right now was not a distance that could be measured in hours. What came next? The journalist, the documentation, the exposure, the noise that Marcus had always intended to make and had finally made in the most irreversible way available, was already in motion. The only thing left was to not look away from what the light showed. They drove for 20 minutes before anyone spoke. Sorrel's partner navigated without instruction, taking the route that Sorrel indicated with small gestures. Left here, right at the signal, through the underpass, the language of 2 people who had worked together long enough to have compressed their communication into minimum viable signals. The motorcycles ran ahead and behind, bracketing the sedan, Ryder's taillight steady in the wet dark ahead, and Harlan's headlight in the rear view behind, and the formation of it, the way the bikes held their positions without instruction, the way the group moved as a single thing across the city at 4 a.m, was something Evan noticed and filed without being able to name exactly what it meant, except that it meant something about what people became to each other over time when the thing that held them together was not convenience, but chosen loyalty maintained through difficulty. Nathan Creedy had fallen asleep somewhere in the 3rd mile. Not gradually. Suddenly, the way people fell asleep when their body finally received confirmation that the immediate emergency was past and made a unilateral decision. He was against the door with his head tilted back and his mouth slightly open and his hands still folded in his lap, and he looked, asleep, younger than he had looked awake, less damaged, like sleep had returned him briefly to a version of himself that predated the past 6 weeks. Marcus was watching him. He kept everything, Marcus said quietly. Every record he was afraid of. He hid it in a storage unit registered under his mother's maiden name. He's been paying the rent on it every month for 11 years because he didn't know what to do with what he had, but he couldn't make himself destroy it. He paused. 11 years of paying storage rent on evidence he was too frightened to use. Why now? Evan said. His wife died. 8 months ago. Marcus looked at the sleeping man.
He told me, the 2 days we were held together, he said after she died he didn't have anyone left to be afraid for. Fear on behalf of yourself is a different thing than fear on behalf of someone you love. When there's no one left to protect, he stopped. He found my drop address in an old mechanics forum. I don't know how. He's not a technical person. He said it took him 4 months of searching. He shook his head slowly. 4 months to find a way to reach me. And then they found him, Evan said. And then they found him, Marcus confirmed. The sedan turned onto a street Evan didn't recognize and pulled into the parking lot of an all-night diner, the kind that existed in every city, that had been the same diner for 30 years without updating anything, that smelled from the parking lot of coffee and bacon grease and the particular warmth of a space that had never fully cooled because there was always someone inside who needed it not to. The sign said Kelsey's in yellow neon, one letter dimmer than the others, the S at the end struggling. Ryder was already off his bike.
The diner had 4 other customers: a man in a delivery uniform eating eggs alone at the counter, 2 women in scrubs sharing a plate of toast and talking in the low voices of people mid-shift, and an old man by the window who appeared to be existing rather than eating, his coffee untouched, his eyes on the street outside. The waitress was in her 60s, heavy-set, with the compressed efficiency of someone who had been doing this specific job for a very long time and had no remaining patience for anything extraneous. She looked at the group that came through the door, 8 people, several of whom were visibly wet and one of whom was visibly injured and another of whom appeared to be partially asleep on his feet. And she pulled 8 menus from behind the counter without comment and said, "Booth in the back seat 6. I'll bring another table." "Thank you," Torres said. "Coffee?" the waitress said. "Every cup you have," Dex said. She nodded and went to the coffee station. They settled into the back of the diner. The booth seated 6, and the table the waitress brought accommodated the rest. Marcus sat in the corner of the booth with his back to the wall. The position, Evan noticed, that Ryder had moved to claim before he saw Marcus moving toward it, and then had simply redirected himself to the chair at the end of the table without comment, because some habits and some needs didn't require explanation between people who had once known each other well enough to know which wall a person needed at their back. Nathan Creedy was given the seat nearest the heater. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup when it arrived and held it against his sternum like it was a source of heat he was trying to absorb directly, and for a long moment he just held it and breathed the steam and said nothing, and nobody pressured him to say anything. And this collective, unspoken decision to give the man the silence he needed was the first thing in the night that made Evan's throat tighten in a way he hadn't expected. Sorrel was at the far end of the table with his phone. He'd been on it since they entered, speaking in the abbreviated language of someone relaying information through a channel that had protocols. He ended the call and looked at Ryder. "The journalist is standing by," he said. "I've sent her the preliminary material, the summary of what's in the notebook, the financial documentation we had from our own investigation, the Pruitt connection. She's ready to move the moment we transmit the complete package." "When does it publish?" Ryder said. "Digital goes up the moment she files. Print follows. She has editors standing by." Sorrel set the phone on the table. "By 6 a.m., this will be on every news aggregator that matters. By 8, it'll be in front of people who can act on it." He paused. "Gerald Voss and Lieutenant Pruitt will know about it before they know about it, if you understand what I mean. The kind of story that moves this fast through the networks. You can feel it coming before you can see it." Ryder nodded. He looked at Marcus. "The notebook." "Harlan has it," Marcus said. Harlan reached into his jacket and set the notebook on the table. It was still in the same condition Evan had last seen it. The plain brown leather cover, the worn edges, the weight of everything it contained. Marcus reached out and put his hand on it. He didn't open it. He just held it for a moment with his palm flat on the cover, the way you touch something that had been yours for a long time and that you were about to give away. Then he pushed it across the table to Sorrel. "Everything in there is documented," Marcus said. "The badge numbers, the transaction dates, the names of the shell companies. The account numbers are in the back pages in the appendix. I used a substitution cipher that Ryder can verify because I used the same cipher when we were kids to leave notes for each other." He looked at Ryder. "You remember it." Ryder looked at him. "The alphabetical shift." Shifted by 7, same as always. Something passed between them at that. At the word always, at the implication of a shared language that had survived decades of separation intact. Something too layered to be grief alone or relief alone. I remember, Ryder said. Sorrel took the notebook and opened it to the back pages and looked at the numbers written there. He passed his phone to Ryder. Verify the first sequence. Ryder took the phone. He looked at the numbers in the notebook, worked through something silently, and typed the decoded sequence into the phone. He handed it back. Sorrel looked at it and showed it to his partner, who made a small affirmative sound. That's the primary account, Sorrel said. We've seen that number in our own investigation. That's the account that routes through the Voss Shell Company into the development consortium. He closed the notebook carefully. This is the last piece. This is what we've been missing. He looked at Marcus directly.
8 years. 8 years, Marcus said. Are you... Sorrel stopped.
He started again with the precision of someone choosing words carefully. Is there anything you need before I transmit this? Anything you want on record in your own words? Marcus considered this for a moment. He looked around the table, at Sorrel, at Harlan, at Torres and Dex, at Creedy with his coffee, at Ryder. He looked at Evan last. Write it down, he said. My name is Marcus Calloway. I am 53 years old. I was a member of the Iron Wolves motorcycle Brotherhood and a mechanic by trade. 20 years ago, I was framed for a crime I did not commit by Gerald Voss, with the cooperation of then-Officer Gareth Pruitt, because I witnessed financial transactions that connected Voss to a larger network of municipal corruption that has operated in this city for 30 years. I did not run. I chose to disappear because I believed it was the only way to build a case that would hold. He paused. I was wrong about some things. I was right about the evidence, and the evidence is complete. Sorrel was recording on his phone. He kept his eyes on Marcus throughout. Is there anything you want to say about the personal cost? Sorrel said carefully. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I lost 20 years with my brother. I lost the ability to know my nephew except from a distance too far to touch. I lost Nathan Creedy 6 weeks of his life that he's never going to get back. He looked at Creedy, who had opened his eyes and was looking at Marcus with an expression that was exhausted and present and held something complex in it. I don't have a number for any of that. I can't put it in a document. He looked at Sorrel, but I wanted on record that the people who took those things, not just Voss, not just Pruitt, the people above them, the people who built the infrastructure that let this run for 30 years, they took those things deliberately. They didn't take them as collateral damage. They took them as a strategy. Making people disappear, making people afraid, making people choose between their families and the truth, that was the mechanism. That was how it worked. He stopped. So that's what I want on record, not just the numbers. The mechanism. The diner was quiet around them. The delivery man at the counter had finished his eggs. The scrub-wearing women had left. The old man by the window was still looking at the street. I've got it, Sorrel said. He stopped the recording. He typed for 2 minutes on his phone. Then he looked up. Ready to transmit. On your word. He looked at Ryder, not at Marcus. At Ryder. Ryder looked at his brother. The question was clear without being spoken. Marcus said, Send it. Sorrel pressed something on his phone. The diner hummed. The coffee maker behind the counter made its cycling sound. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely, the silence of its absence more noticeable now than its presence had been, the way you notice the end of a constant sound more than the sound itself. Pruitt was taken into custody at 6:47 in the morning. Sorrel relayed this from his phone with the flat brevity of a man reading operational outcomes. Uniform officers, not 7th District, jurisdiction deliberately reassigned, arrived at his home address and served a warrant that had been filed at 6:15, the moment the story went live, and the documented evidence entered the hands of people who could not be managed or pressured by the network Voss had maintained for 30 years. Voss himself called his attorney at 6:51. The attorney's office was watched by Sorrel's organization, and the call was logged as confirmation of the story's impact. By 7:15, two city council members who appeared in Marcus's documentation had issued statements through their press offices that managed to be both vehement and incoherent, which was, Torres noted, the specific combination of responses produced by people who were guilty and scared and had not yet been told what their attorneys wanted them to say. The journalist piece ran in full with documentation attached. It named names. It included the financial account sequences Ryder had decoded from the notebook. It included Sorrell's organization's 6 years of investigative work as supplementary material. It included a statement from Marcus Calloway, by name, identified, no longer invisible, describing the mechanism. By 8 in the morning, the story had been picked up by 3 national outlets. By 9, it was on television. Evan sat in the back booth of Kelsey's diner and watched Ryder watch the screen above the counter, where the morning news was running coverage with a graphic that said, Millbrook Corruption Network, in block letters that had the slightly breathless quality of news graphics that were being built in real time. His face as he watched was not triumphant. It was the face of someone who had put something down that they'd been carrying for a very long time and was working out what their body felt like without the weight. Marcus was beside him. He'd had his arm properly looked at. Sorrell had made a call and a medical contact had arrived at the diner at 7 a.m. with a kit and the quiet professionalism of someone who had treated injuries in circumstances that didn't permit hospital visits. The wound was cleaned and properly dressed and declared non-critical with the caveat that non-critical still required a real physician within 24 hours. Marcus had agreed to this with the specific compliance of someone who had been told his injuries were survivable and had therefore downgraded them from active concern to deferred concern. He was drinking his 3rd coffee. He was watching the television too, but more briefly, checking it and returning his attention to the table, to the people around it, as if the television was confirming something he already knew and what was actually worth looking at was here. Creddy had eaten. This seemed important. He'd ordered eggs and toast from the waitress and had eaten with the slow concentration of someone relearning the mechanics of a normal act, and when he finished, he had sat with his empty plate in front of him for a moment and then looked at Marcus and said, "The storage unit. My mother's maiden name was Hollis. The unit is at Millbrook Self-Storage number 44. The key is..." He'd reached into his shirt, beneath it, and produced a key on a piece of string that he'd clearly been wearing against his skin. "They didn't find this," he said. "They searched everything else, but they didn't think to look." He stopped. His voice had developed an unsteadiness in it that he was managing with effort. "I kept thinking if they found it, it would all have been for nothing. 11 years. He set the key on the table. 62 years old, and the most important thing I own is a key on a piece of string. Torres picked up the key gently. "It wasn't for nothing," she said. Creddy looked at her. He was a man who Evans suspected was not accustomed to being spoken to with directness and kindness in the same sentence by someone who looked the way Torres looked. He absorbed it with the visible effort of someone whose defenses had been maintained for so long that dropping them, even in safety, required physical work. "No," he said finally. "I suppose it wasn't." Brick arrived at 9:15. He came through the diner door with the look of a man who had spent the night in a situation that had not been comfortable and was not going to complain about this. He had a bruise developing along his left jaw, and his jacket was torn at the shoulder, and he moved with a slight favoring of his right side that suggested the night had been more physical than he would characterize it. He sat down across from Ryder. "They took me on the Keller's lot approach," he said. "2 of them. I didn't have the documents on me by then. I'd passed them to a secondary hold at the Jenner Street location 20 minutes before they got to me. Old protocol." He touched the bruise on his jaw with a finger, assessing it. "They figured that out eventually. Took them about 4 hours. He looked at the table, at the empty space where the documents had been. "Where did it go?" "Sorrell's organization," Ryder said. "It's published. It's done." Brick looked at the television above the counter. He looked for a long time at the graphic. He looked at the name scrolling beneath it in the news ticker. Then he looked at Marcus. The last time Brick had seen Marcus Calloway, Marcus had been 20 years younger and in the process of being erased from the world he'd belonged to, and whatever Brick thought about how those 20 years had looked on him, whatever the arithmetic of absence and return produced in him, he managed it with the economy of a man who had learned that the most dignified way to feel something large was to feel it quietly. "Marcus," he said. Brick, Marcus said. That was all. It was enough. Harlan, beside Brick, reached over and took Brick's coffee cup and moved it in front of him from the end of the table, the gesture of someone who knew an old man had just driven or walked to a diner after a physical night and needed coffee in front of him immediately. Brick took it without looking and drank it and said nothing, and the table accommodated this without comment. Dex was the one who finally broke the particular silence that had settled over the back of Kelsey's diner at 9:15 in the morning, with the news running and the coffee cooling, and 8 people sitting together in the particular way that people sat together after something enormous had happened, and the adrenaline had metabolized, and what remained was just the fact of being alive and present and no longer required to run. So, Dex said, what happens now? It was addressed to the table in general. Nobody answered immediately. Torres said, Sorrell's organization handles the legal follow-through. We're listed as cooperative sources in the documentation. They've agreed not to bring us further into the official process than necessary. That's the legal what happens now, Dex said. I meant the other one. Ryder looked at his brother. Marcus looked at Ryder. I have to resurface, Marcus said. Officially, I've been legally dead in this state for 15 years. There's a declaration of death on file from when Marcus Calloway stopped existing. That needs to be undone. He said it matter-of-factly, the way you said things that were simultaneously enormous and simply true. That's months of legal process, paperwork, probably a lawyer. Torres knows a lawyer, Dex said. Torres knows a lawyer who does motorcycle registration disputes, Torres said. She does other things. I'll call her, Torres said. Marcus looked at his coffee. He turned the cup in his hand slowly, one rotation, the way a person turned something they were thinking about. I'd like to stay in the city, he said, if there's a place. He wasn't looking at Ryder when he said it. He was looking at the coffee cup. I'm not asking to come back to the club. That's not what this is. I've been gone too long and the club is what it is now, and I'm not the same person who was IW07. He paused. But I'd like to stay, if there's a place for something like that. Ryder looked at his brother for a long time. There's a place, he said. He said it the way he said most things, without decoration, without the architecture of elaboration around it, just the flat and final fact of it. There's a place. The kind of statement that closed a 20-year question. Marcus looked up from the coffee cup. He held Ryder's gaze for a moment. He nodded once. That was the whole conversation. And it was, in the way that economy of language sometimes was, more complete than any longer version would have been. At 10 in the morning, Ryder drove Evan back to Carl Seaver's house. Not on the motorcycle, in Torres's truck, because Evan's situation required a degree of normality in its re-entry that a motorcycle arrival at a foster home at 10 a.m. might complicate. They drove mostly in silence, which was not an uncomfortable silence, but a companionable one. The silence of 2 people who had been through something together and were at the end of it, and were feeling the particular quiet that came at the end. Carl Seaver's house was exactly as Evan had left it. A single-story rental with a concrete front step and a screen door that didn't sit flush with the frame, and a car in the driveway that belonged to Carl Seaver and had not moved. The lights inside were on, which suggested Carl was awake, which meant there was going to be a conversation about where Evan had been. He was not particularly afraid of this conversation. He was aware that this in itself was new. Ryder parked at the curb. He left the engine running. Evan had his hand on the door but didn't open it yet. The journalist, Ryder said, she's going to want to talk to you about finding the crate, about coming to the garage. You're part of the story. I know. That's your choice. Nobody's going to push you. I'll talk to her, Evan said. It's the right thing to do. Ryder nodded. He was looking at the house. The foster placement, Seaver. How long has that been? 8 months. Is the situation? It's fine, Evan said. He's not cruel, he's just not present. He paused. There's a difference. There is, Ryder agreed. Something moved across his face. When the legal process with Marcus is moving, when he's got an official identity again, there are options for your situation. He said it carefully, the way you said something you didn't want to oversell. Not promises. Options. Evan looked at him. What kind of options? The kind that involve a person with an established legal identity and a registered business being able to apply for guardianship of a minor who has been in the foster system for 3 years. He kept his eyes on the house. That's a long process, a lot of steps, and it requires... He stopped. It requires that to be what you want, not what someone else decided. Evan sat with this for a moment, with the weight of someone offering him a future that was not the future the world had been pointing him toward, with the specific sensation of a door appearing in a wall he'd been staring at for years. Marcus has been gone for 20 years, Evan said. He's going to have a lot of things to put back together. He is. Adding a teenager to that, he suggested it, Ryder said. This morning, before you woke up. He glanced at Evan for the first time since parking. He said, I've been watching that kid for years. I'd like to stop watching and start being present. Those were the exact words. He paused. He's not good at sentiment, but he means what he says. Both things are true. Evan looked at the house, at the screen door that didn't sit right, at the car in the driveway. I want to finish my year here, he said, not because it's good, because leaving in the middle of a school year is harder to explain and harder on the next placement, and I've learned that transitions are smoother if you do them at natural points. He paused. I've moved 7 times. I know how transitions work. Ryder looked at him. Something in his expression shifted into something that was not pity. Pity would have been unwelcome, and Evan would have recognized it, but was the acknowledgement of a competence that should never have had to develop in a 15-year-old and was present anyway and deserved to be recognized as such. End of the school year, Ryder said. End of the school year, Evan confirmed. Ryder nodded. Then that's the plan. Evan opened the door. The morning air came in, cold still, but cleaner than the night had been, the rain having done its work and left the city smelling of wet concrete and distance, which was the smell Evan associated with mornings that came after significant things and felt different from ordinary mornings in a way that was hard to describe but was undeniable. He got out. He stood at the curb. Ryder, he said. Ryder looked at him through the window. The tag, Evan said. The motorcycle tag. Can I see it? Ryder reached into his jacket pocket. He brought out the tag and held it through the window. Evan took it and looked at it. The cracked leather, the scratched metal, the letters engraved deep. Marcus Calloway. IW-07. He turned it over. On the back, in letters too small to read without squinting, was something he hadn't noticed before. He squinted. Made by R. Kane. For the one who stays. He looked up at Ryder. I made 2, Ryder said. Mine says for the one who goes. That was our thing. I was always the one heading out, and he was the one who stayed and kept the garage running. Something moved across his face. Turned out we had it backwards. Evan looked at the back of the tag for another moment, then he handed it back. He's back now, Evan said. Yeah, Ryder said. He is, Garanta. Then maybe neither of you has to be either one anymore. Ryder took the tag. He held it in his palm and looked at it and didn't say anything for a moment, and in that moment his face did what it had been carefully managed against doing for most of the night. It simply showed what was there. Unmanaged, complete. The face of someone who had arrived, after a very long road, at a place they'd stopped expecting to reach. Then he closed his hand around the tag. Go inside, he said. Get dry. Sleep. Evan stepped back from the truck. I'll call, Ryder said. This week. I know. He walked up the front path. He heard the truck pull away from the curb behind him. He heard it move down the street and turn at the corner, and the sound of its engine fade into the ordinary morning noise of the city waking up. He stood on the concrete step in front of Carl Seaver's house, with his wet jacket and his bruised shoulder and his hands that were warmer now than they'd been all night. And he took one breath of the cold morning air, and he looked at the street. The Millbrook overpass was 6 blocks east. He couldn't see it from here, but he knew where it was the way you knew where things were once you'd been to them in the dark. The bridge, the mud, the wooden crate pushed against the concrete support pillar, The cracked leather in his hand and the name he recognized, and the feeling of something that had no category landing in his chest. That had been yesterday. That had been a year ago. That had been a whole other version of him. He thought about what Carl Siver was going to say when he opened the door. He thought about school tomorrow, and Mr. Pratt's geometric proofs, and the desk at the back of the room where he sat and understood things quickly and had no one to tell. He thought about end of school year as a unit of time, finite, manageable, a thing that could be survived because it had an end that was visible from here. He thought about Marcus Calloway in the corner of a diner booth turning a coffee cup in his hands, saying, "I'd like to stop watching and start being present." He thought about the notebook and his own name in it and what it meant to be someone's contingency, to be the piece a person trusted most to hold when everything else failed. He thought about an engine, the one Ryder had described, in a version of this story that hadn't happened yet but felt like it would, the kind of engine that sat untouched for years in a garage while someone found their courage, while the right person arrived to see it not as broken, but as waiting. He thought about what it felt like to fix something everyone else had given up on. He thought it probably felt like this, like standing on a step in the cold morning after the rain, with a bruised shoulder and dry enough hands, listening to the city wake up around you, understanding for the first time in years that the sound of it was not indifferent, that it was just sound, ordinary and complete, and that what you made of it was yours to decide. He opened the door. Carl Siver was on the couch in front of the television. He looked up. "Where have you been?" he said. Evan considered the question. He considered all the possible answers to it, the true ones, the abbreviated ones, the ones that would produce further questions, and the ones that would close the conversation. He thought about what he could say that was accurate and manageable, and that didn't require him to explain a night that would take hours to explain, and that Carl Siver did not have the context or the capacity to receive. "Out," Evan said. "I'm sorry I didn't leave a note. I'll do that next time." Carl looked at him for a moment with the mild attention of someone performing the due diligence of guardianship without the emotional investment that would make due diligence feel different from performance. Then he looked back at the television. "There's bread if you're hungry," he said. "Thank you," Evan said. He went to his room. He sat on the edge of the bed. He put his hands on his knees and looked at the wall, the ordinary wall of an ordinary bedroom in an ordinary house, and sat with the specific feeling of someone who had been through something enormous and was now in a small room that had not changed and was managing the gap between those two things. Outside, the city was continuing, trucks on the main road, a neighbor's car starting, someone's radio through a wall. He thought about the Iron Wolves garage, about the smell of it, motor oil and metal and old coffee and something underneath those smells like purpose. About Ryder at the workbench reading a notebook by yellow light. About Harlan's hand on Marcus's shoulder, one grip, released. About Torres's face saying it wasn't for nothing. About Brick with his coffee and his bruised jaw and the specific dignity of a man who did not complain about things that had already happened. He thought about Marcus's handwriting, precise and small, functional. The handwriting of someone who had trained themselves into something more useful than what they'd started with. He thought, "I can do that." He didn't mean the handwriting. He lay down on the bed in his jacket and closed his eyes, and the morning light came through the curtains, and the city made its ordinary sounds. And Evan Calloway, 15 years old, who had found a dead man's tag in the mud and followed it to the only door worth walking through, slept. And in the Iron Wolves garage on Millbrook Road, in the space between the workbench and the tool cabinet where the light was good, a motorcycle tag hung on a nail in the wall. Small, cracked leather, metal face scratched with years and use. Not displayed, not framed, just there. The way things that had found their place were just there. Marcus Calloway, IW-07. And on the back, unreadable from a distance but present in the metal, made by R. Kane, for the one who stays. He stayed. Both of them did in the end. And the garage smelled like oil and metal and coffee and the specific particular warmth of a place where work happened and where people who had survived difficult things came and were not asked to be different from what they were, only to be present, only to show up, only to do the work in front of them with whatever they had. Which was, it turned out, enough. It had always been enough. The only thing that had been missing was someone willing to look closer.